6:30, I call the February 11th Planning Board meeting to order. First thing on the agenda is public comment, and this is if anybody is here in attendance and wishes to bring something up that they would like us to look at in the future, and it's not on the agenda. Does anybody have any comments? Okay. Then we move on to the minutes of January 28th and January 30th.
Madam Chair, I recommend approval of the minutes of January 28th and January 30th, 2020 as corrected.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, we have a request for release, Green Cove LLC lot releases.
I'm going to recuse myself, but I'll stay in the room to answer any questions.
Okay. And Tom, you were going to explain that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me. Sorry I'm late. So we have in your packets, in your first envelope, the orange one, the recently completed planning board inspection, including the values for work determined not yet be completed, based on the calculations by the Department of Public Works. So on the front page, you see the punch list of things that are to be done, an amount of $120,608.40, and those numbers are derived from the Mass DOT spreadsheet previously discussed in the context of subdivision inspections. We have a lot release for lots 1 through 20 in this development, and a tripartite agreement. That tripartite agreement is for the amount of $60,000, which is currently what the developer has on deposit for this development. Interestingly enough, this came to our attention when a closing attorney called and asked for a copy of the lot release because they couldn't find one. As it turns out, none of the lots were ever released. And so there are currently, and I just did the math a couple minutes ago, I believe 11 of 20 lots that have been sold in this subdivision, absent any lot releases. Because typically when someone comes to the building department for a building permit, they assume that the lots have been released because you can't sell them without a lot release. But for whatever reason, 11 have been sold. So at this point, we are trying to put a patch on that and make sure we have a bond in place to ensure the road improvements are completed prior to all the lots being sold. This is where we're at presently. So the as in the case of Cape Cod Estates, sometimes we have a lack of continuity. I won't call it a disagreement. We have a lack of continuity between what the DPW's estimated bond amount should be and what the developer proposes that bond amount to be. So much like in Cape Estates, where we had an estimated bond of 400 and change, we did a lot release for half of those lots for 200 and change, essentially about 50%. So, based on the precedent that we've already done, I don't think it's totally outside of the pale, even though this is, I haven't seen anything like this before where basically lots had been sold and nobody had picked up on them. And they've been out there for a while. There's houses that are built on them. So my recommendation at this point is let's get the lots released properly. Let's complete the tripartite agreement to make sure those funds are in place. And those funds would be subject to the planning board releasing them upon the completion of the work. Sometimes there's confusion about, we're holding this money so the developer can use it to make sure that work is done. But the developer does the work, and then those funds are released upon the inspection and approval of the planning board and reduction of the bond. So that's where we're at presently. We've got a lot release for 20 lots. 11 of them have been sold. Multiples have been built on. And we've got a tripartite agreement for $60,000.
Comments or questions from the board?
I'm wondering where the responsibility was for that.
Well, I've had some very brief conversations with town council. And it'd be my preference to continue that discussion with town council and perhaps send a letter to that closing attorney to note that the protection afforded under Massachusetts general is that covenant. So if we have a covenant, and you realize that there is no covenant, and you have the closing anyhow, that's sort of beyond it, oh, I didn't know. Now, they called and asked, and we replied, so there wasn't an exchange of letters or anything like that. But I think it's, would be good to put that particular closing attorney and copy to the registry that, these lots had not been released. But the registry had, done the transaction as well, even though there wasn't a recorded lot release with the registry.
So you're suggesting it was an attorney's responsibility, there's not a public official who was responsible?
Well, if you have continuity and you know that I'm the person in charge of the development as the planner, and I know that these lots haven't been released, but at some point I bump into the building inspector, and the building inspector goes, oh, yeah, I just gave a permit for that. So, part of the issue is the lack of one department knowing what other departments are doing. But like I said, typically, if the building inspector issued a building permit, he would only do so for a lot that had been sold, and the only reason that person would come to him with a sold lot is because it had been released by the town. So to who do you point a finger at? I can't say. But like I said, I've not run into an instance before where someone was, had, maybe one, maybe two, but 11's.
Big number.
Yeah. So I can't tell you what happened. There's a lot of archaeology, as I've explained before, in my role as the planner, figuring out what had happened before, but this is a head scratcher and I don't understand it. I'm just trying to fix it now.
Paul?
Yeah, I just have a question. On the precedent that we've set before, we have about 50% coverage. And that's about what it is for the cost of, in this particular case, the 60,000, roughly 50%.
Yeah, well,
There.
sometimes the things that are on the punch list are the developer will contend that, well, I can get that done for a whole lot less than what that amount is. But if we, the town, have to step in, we have to do those things at prevailing wage. So it's not unusual for the developer to bring an estimate in or say, I can get this done for this amount. But in the protocol we've been talking about with engineering, you can get you can get an estimate, a quote for lots of things, but to what detail is that quote? How valid is that quote? And them using the numbers from MassDOT based on their punch list, they include those costs. And in this case, we've had some discussion with the developer, like, well, those drainage structures have actually been fixed. But the engineering department looks at it and goes, well, I don't have a record of those being fixed. I don't have an inspection for those sort of things. So as always, we move forward with that abundance of caution to make sure there's to make sure that our exposure is covered by going with the prevailing wage and making a very conservative estimate of the work that needs to be done.
Thank you.
Bob?
Are all the lots on Faith's Way, or are they also on Timothy Bourne Cartway?
The lots all front on Faith's Way, one of them or address 48 Faith's Way is on the corner of Faith's Way and Timothy Bourne Cartway. Okay. As far in as you go.
Anybody else? Okay, so.
I'd just like to make a comment. This, I haven't been keeping score, so I can't really give you the exact number, but there've been other instances where there's been a lack of information exchange dealing with the building commissioner. And maybe we should start keeping score.
Well, as I said, from the building commissioner's perspective, the only way somebody who wasn't the developer who would come in to say, I want a building permit for this, is if the lot had been sold. Now, the building commissioner doesn't have anything to do with a lot being sold. That's the planning board releasing the covenant, that's the developer selling the land, that's the registry recording the deed. Somebody comes into the building inspector, says, I own this lot, I want a building permit for it. He's gonna make that assumption that, oh, these lots must have been released.
Well, it's just odd to be operating on assumptions in an age when we actually collect data and keep records. It's an easier way to work. Just a comment.
Okay, any other comments from the board?
Nope.
So then we would need
If you have a motion to release the lots per the tripartite agreement, we'll execute the documents and get it done.
So move.
Second?
Been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next on the agenda is an approval not required plan. The applicant is Lisa Lyden, plan of land to adjust the lot line between lots 288 and 289 to create lots 294 and 295 as shown on the plan, and that's BSS Design.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Tom Bunker, BSS Design. I used my crayons this afternoon and just put a little color on this so maybe it's a little easier to understand. Up I have a inset on the plan here. This green is the existing lot line. And the whole purpose of this blue is I want to put in a swimming pool in this location, and the line will end up looking like this, so we can maintain the 10-foot setback for that structure, 10 feet from this house and from there. Basically, this, the green line is the existing. The two orange parcels are equal size, 1,185 square feet each, so this orange parcel will be taken away from this lot and added to this lot. This orange parcel will be taken off of here and added to this lot. So we'll be going from the green line around here to the blue line, which goes over this way and then back. The two lots, that is the lot with this house and the lot with this house, will remain the same once it's all said and done. But because they're owned in different ownership, then we have to create these lots, convey them to the other owner, and then recombine them. So that's what's going on here. No new lots are being created, no new building lots are being created.
And as I understand, if I made no change in frontage and no change in area.
That too, yes. The frontage remains the same here. Frontage for this lot remains the same along here. The circles show the required lot widths fit on there. The areas don't change.
Does the board have any questions?
Yeah, pretty straight.
Okay. I would need a motion.
So move.
Without regard to, we endorse
We
without
endorse without-
regard,
Right, thank you.
regard to buildability, et cetera.
Yes.
Second?
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, public hearing / decision. And first is the applicant is Falmouth Air Park Homeowners Association. Special permit application and definitive plan application for permission to alter the layout of lot 67 and open space parcel Z to allow for the creation of additional airplane hangar space at 67 Air Park Drive, Falmouth Engineering. And we do have in our packet motion. Would you like to read, Bob? Exercise your
Yeah,
voice?
Sure. Motion that the planning board vote to approve the application of Falmouth Air Park Homeowners Association, Inc. to modify the planned residential development special permit under Article 25, planned residential development of the zoning bylaw for a plan entitled Site Plan Proposed Hangar Expansion for Lots 67 Airport Park Drive, prepared for Falmouth Air Park, HOA in Falmouth. 2 sheets prepared by Falmouth Engineering dated September 20th, 2019, scale 1 inch equals 80 feet, along with drainage entitled Drainage Worksheet for Lot 67 Air Park Drive, prepared for Falmouth Air Park, HOA in Falmouth, and floor plans prepared by Erectitube dated May 5th, 2008, with the following findings and conditions. Findings: the applicant is seeking to revise the previous definitive plan and special permit issued by the planning board in 1986 by modifying the lot line along lot 67 and open space parcel Z, which results in 38,760 square feet of the open space being annexed to Lot 67, which will still leave the planned residential development with a surplus of 8.04 acres of open space above the minimum required. This decision does not include the addition of the proposed airplane hangar buildings. The applicant will need approval to modify the definitive plan and special permit for any alterations or new construction on the site which affects operation. The application also falls under the Coastal Pond Overlay District and Wildlife Corridor. This open space serves as the corridor for the migration of wildlife. The planning board finds that the modifications to the open space is appropriate for the open space requirements as outlined in the planned residential development. Conditions: 1, the plan shall be constructed as approved. Any changes shall be reviewed by the planning board to determine if a modification of this decision is necessary. Pursuant to section 24183B of the zoning bylaw, no permit for full or partial occupancy shall be issued until the planning board is satisfied that the conditions of this approval and predecessor approvals have been met. 2, the applicant will work with town staff to address drainage issues as referenced above. Drainage issues will be incorporated as part of the requirements of condition 1.
Does the board have any discussion of this motion? Oh, I need a second first.
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on this motion? Before we call for a vote on it. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous.
If we may.
And I recuse myself from this vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. Yes, of course, you did. So it's unanimous of those eligible with one recusal, so it's 6-1.
We also have an open hearing we need to close as well.
Pardon?
We also have an open hearing for Falmouth Air Park that we need to close as well. We kept the hearing open, awaiting Bob's return.
Oh, I messed that up.
That's fine. You can do the decision and then close the hearing.
Okay, so
Did
now we
anyone
need a
wanna
motion to
speak?
close this hearing.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded that the hearing is closed as it should have been. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next. The applicant is 797 Main Street LLC, special permit application for parking within 5 feet from property line at 797 Main Street, CEG. And you have a notice, yes?
No, public meeting notice was issued on January 24th and January 31st, 2020. And 18 abutters were notified by certified mail, return receipt requested.
Okay. Mr. Shuba.
Good evening, Madam Chair, member of the boards. For the record, my name is Hal Chuba. I represent the applicant on this application, and we're back. This is, can't remember, this is probably the 5th time that we're back here, but actually, if you remember at the last meeting, we were here for a site amendment of a proposal that did not, I just want to go back a little bit just so we can walk through the process. It's confusing, I understand, there's been so many versions of this plan. This is the original plans that was approved by this board for 797 Main Street. This plans also was, it uses Cycle Avenue for share parking with the abutters along the south, east, and west. This plan was approved by this board based on the assumption of the approval that this is the plan to be recorded. We went to the zoning board, and the zoning board had some issues with this plan regarding parking on Cycle Street. They challenged whether the owner had the right to park on Cycle Avenue. There was issues with the abutter to the south for the access to the Island Queen parking lot. There was also other issues, and we not involved with that. Back and forth with the zoning board. Zoning board looked at the agreement that was signed between the two parties, and they had issues with that also. And so after 3-4 different attempts with the zoning board, we had the impression that that plan was not to be approved or is not executable. At that time, based on that plan wasn't executable, we looked at another option to, that we developed, that we can provide parking on the lot without using the Cycle Avenue. And we did develop another plan, which I will, this is another plan that we developed that met not all the parking required. It was short by 2 parking spaces, and the zoning board at that time indicated they are willing to give the 10% relief for the parking. We developed this plan, we came back to this board, and we said, this is the plan that we would like to, so you guys approved this plan, went back to the zoning board. Meanwhile, the abutter, or next to 797, recorded the agreement. Now, it's a recorded agreement, there'll be a court battle between this and that, so we went back and says, our intention is to develop our property, we're not here to fight with any neighbors, we're not here to make, we just, we've been going through this process for almost a year and a half. So, we went back to the zoning board, and it appears that we were probably heading to courts, and we didn't want to do that. So and then at that time, I believe the attorney Kirk did appear before the zoning board and convinced the zoning board that the site plan review, parking, and easement is the jurisdiction of the planning board, it's not the zoning board. Which, that's how we left it, and said, okay, you go back to the planning board, but we cannot approve a plan that wasn't approved by the planning board. You work out the details with the neighbor or with the abutter, because this plan is in violation of the recorded agreement, basically. So we went back, we revised the plan to reflect the recorded agreement, which was between the, so we have another plan, and basically, all the plans are similar, basically. I'll go through this plan just to point out what's different from the other ones. On the previous plan, we did close the access between the 2 properties because we had the dumpster there and the zoning and the loading zone, if you remember. So that was a violation of the recorded agreement. We also, on the agreement, the 815, Falmouth 815 has the right to enter the property along and exit on Cycle Avenue. So that was also a violation. So what we did, we revised the plan, we opened up the access between the 2, and we used Cycle Avenue for parking, which, my understanding, and we were all at the meeting, and that this is the zoning, this is the site plan review, and if there's planning board approves the plan, the zoning, we're only in front of zoning board for a special permit to modify or expand an existing non-conforming structure. Because if you recall, the existing structure on the site does not meet the setback, the side setback. And the 2 proposed uses, the restaurant and the apartments, are allowed uses as of right in the district. So, and I believe that was the end of it, and the zoning board said, you go back to the planning board, figure out your access, your parking between the 2 properties, and come back to us. So we requested a withdrawal without prejudice, because we weren't sure, I said, you've been going back and forth, and every time you come here, you have a different plan. I believe you were at the meeting at that time too, right? So this is the plan. This plan meets the required parking, keeps the easement open for the abutter, uses Cycle Avenue for some of the overflow parking, and it's in harmony with Section 240-240. So, and just for the records, we had no objection to the first one if we were able to approve it, but by the zoning board. But if we had a site plan that we can't execute, that's why we went back and we developed another plan that did not use Cycle Avenue for parking. So this is the plan. The plan honors the agreement between the 2 properties. It maximizes parking for all the abutters. And I believe during that process too, there was some concern about the access and maneuver of large vehicles or loading on the property. So I did provide to Tom a site plan with, this site plan shows a 30-foot box truck, which is equivalent to for the dumpster or truck or delivery truck to the restaurant for delivery. And we have the loading in the back of the building. And we have the required parking spaces. And we're here to modify the site plan again to this site plan. And also, we're here for a special permit to park within 5 feet of the property line. But I would suggest that if this board, if you're going to act on a special permit, I think you probably should do the site amendment first, because what we submitted for the site plan for the special permit was a different layout than this layout. So if you want to amend the site approval first, and then you can act on the special permit to allow the parking within the 5 feet. Again, I know it's so confusing. I tried to do the best I can, and I hope I didn't get you more confused, but I do have a package
Let Tom talk first.
that showed all the plans that I talked about here, you know, on the first one. If you don't mind.
But this is the plan you want us
Yeah,
to
this
act
is-
on.
yeah,
This is it.
This is the plan
I
that,
don't even have to look at another
right,
one.
Tom, that's the one I sent you this afternoon, or?
Correct.
Okay.
So let's not confuse it.
Okay,
No, we don't.
okay,
Okay.
great, that's.
We can
that's-
always yell for them if we
Okay.
need them, all right?
So at this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have, that's,
So it was a very interesting meeting.
yeah.
The Board of Appeals had said that they couldn't do the 2% reduction because they didn't have enough parking to reduce anything. But in this business redevelopment district, that's part of what this is about, is common parking and shared parking. And they were sort of holding to, you need the number of parking places if you want us to decrease it by 2. So they said they couldn't do anything because there wasn't enough parking, period. That it was shared parking, and you can't consider shared parking. So I was sitting there as a planning board member, I've gone for another reason, not for this, thinking, whose purview is that? Because I've always thought the parking was the purview of the planning board. So it seems to me that you've done what you needed to do, and I have to say, I'm sorry that you've had to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, because that isn't the way it should be. And I know you've been at this for probably a year, Close-
Over a year. and
over a
half.
year. So, because of the district it's in, it seems to me that this would satisfy the issues of parking. And I don't know what happens with the recorded agreement and what is held, what you're held to, or your neighbor is held to with that agreement. But if it's shared parking, and that business district, the redevelopment district, is encouraging that, then you shouldn't be turned down by the ZBA for doing what you're supposed to be doing. So I think it's sort of time that we move on from this, and if this meets, Tom, the guidelines that he's supposed to meet, that we can move ahead with this?
Yeah, we've got the requisite number of parking spaces through the shared parking agreement, and we've got the access. The reason I asked for the templates to show vehicle traffic, because there was some concerns from the folks who work at Hogs and Dogs, Linda and Mr. Dogs, I
Right.
forget his name,
Michael.
sorry. Michael, thank you.
Mr. Dog, good guy.
Linda and Michael Bullard is their name.
Thank you, Linda and Michael Bullard. Lovely people. I met them at the FCTV open house. And they were concerned about, will their truck be able to move around the site? So I wanted to make sure we had a template that showed the movements of a truck pulling a trailer, that it would be around the site, and that's one of the things that Hal provided for us.
So are you satisfied that this has met the parking requirements now?
Yes.
Okay.
But Hal was asking that we vote on something first
So-
and then this?
so- In the midst, well, so we were starting off with a special permit to allow a reduction in parking based on the site plan that the ZBA had previously not cared for. So when the neighbor said, "I've got an easement across this property and you're taking away my easement agreement here," then they wanted to go back to the original plan, which was not part of the special permit application. So the special permit application, because the site plan, and essentially what changes is at the bottom of the plan, where you see that green stripe of landscaping along Cycle Ave. Everything else on the plan was the same as far as the location of the parking spaces on 797 proper. So since we were working on doing just a special permit to approve, and I'm gonna call it Site Plan 5, just to make up a number. So we had Site Plan 5 that we had previously approved to send him to the ZBA, and then when they came back for the request for parking reduction, we were approving that permission to park within 5 feet of the property lines based on Site Plan 5. Well, the discussion with the neighbors at the ZBA produced Site Plan number 6, which looks an awful lot like Site Plan number 4. So at this point, we've got a plan that meets the neighbors' needs, it meets the applicant's needs, and so it's sort of an amendment to the site plan that we were, covers the basis for the site plan for the special permit, because the special permit is only about approving parking spaces within 5 foot of the property line. And those are essentially the parking spaces between Hogs and Dogs and 797.
So what I'm trying to understand is we need to vote to rescind our original vote of approval.
No, we're gonna vote to administratively approve site plan number 6, which essentially usurps site plan number 5. So when I send the note to the building inspector, here's the plan of record, disregard any previous site plans that you've seen, and so this will go along with the special permit to the building inspector, so he knows what's being built on the site. So we don't need to rescind site plan number 5, we're just approving the special permit. And typically, the board wants to see that draft decision and vote it. So at this point, I would expect the planning board to request a positive motion. We'll put together the site plan and special permit approval, so you'll have a decision at the next meeting that says the board votes to modify site plan, and the board votes to approve the special permit to allow parking within 5 feet of the property line.
Okay, now I'm beginning to understand it, so. Oh, Jim,
Tom, could you review the significant changes in the two plans? I only can notice one, it's just the change of the location of the dumpster, but I don't have total recall of what the other plan looked like.
Well, Hal's drawn them all, so can you give us the skinny Hal and what differs?
I know that, I can see that the dumpster was in contention before because the easement said that they could be moved and the planning, and the ZBA didn't like that, and so now you've tucked it up behind the building.
Right.
And so it's taken it out of play. Is there what else have you done?
Along the west side of the building, we had angled parking.
So Hal, if you could use the cursor
Oh, sure.
and just point to the plan on the,
Yep. So the first, the location of the dumpster, right?
Yeah.
It was moved from
corner.
somewhere in this location to the back of the building. And also along the side of to the west of the building, we had 4 parking spaces on the angle part, and that was raised, I think it raised some concerns with the town engineer at one time too. So we changed that from an angle, parking to, 90-degree perpendicular parking. We were able to add another, I believe, 5 parking spaces to the side from the original plan that was submitted. And we added the loading to the back where the dumpster is too, because before we had, if you recall, we had the dumpster here and we had 2 parking spaces in front of the dumpster. And I think it was challenged to like, whether you can count those for parking or not. So now we have a designated loading area in front of the dumpster that it's not counted as parking space. And basically, those are the changes.
Thank you.
Okay, but Tom, this is a special permit, and so we have to have a vote of at least 5, correct? to
I think
allow
we're
this?
administratively approving the site plan
But-
first and
First,
then doing
yeah.
the special permit.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
And I think if they would have brought the special permit in at the same time, I think they left it off.
Okay.
You know, that they needed the special permit to do the parking thing.
Okay, so you'll do administrative approval, bring the decision to us, and then at the next
So it's
meeting.
been my experience that the board would like to see the decision before they vote.
Absolutely, yes.
Usually.
So if you're fine with the changes to the site plan,
So administratively, we're saying
Then we need
Tom
a,
could do it.
Yeah.
we need a motion then to approve administrative approval.
I move administrative approval.
Second.
Any discussion further on that?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
and
Thank you.
at your request, we, the staff, I can't say aye, the staff will prepare a positive motion for the special permit that will vote at the meeting on 2/25.
Okay,
So-
just if I may,
Yes.
I know there's so many versions of this. For less confusion, maybe, Tom, we can reference the plan with the latest revision of, revision number 4 of February 6, I believe.
2/10/20.
2/10/20. So with that, I think that probably be more appropriate.
That makes
right?
it
Instead
absolutely
of
clear
reference
that this is the one
1,
we're
2,
talking
3,
about.
4, yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience,
Thank
too, beyond belief. Okay, so we've got now our public hearing for the zoning articles for spring 2020 town meeting. And I will remind the board that this is not for any type of discussion, it is purely for listening to these articles for town meeting. And Paul, you get the task of reading those articles.
Well, first of all, the articles have been noticed for publishing dates 1/24 and 1/31/2020 on all articles. In accordance with Section 5's Chapter 40A, Mass General Law, Article 43 of the Falmouth zoning bylaw, the Falmouth Planning Board shall conduct a public hearing on Tuesday, February 11, 2020, at 6:30 in Town Hall, 59 Town Hall Square, et cetera, to discuss the following proposed amendment to the Falmouth zoning bylaw. Excuse me. Article, to see if the town will vote to amend the official zoning map by rezoning the land shown on Falmouth Assessor's Map 39-21-005A000 from Single Resident District C to Public Use District. Said land owned, located at 300 Dillingham Avenue, is the site of the former senior center totaling approximately 1.6 acres, or do so, take any other action on this matter on request of the planning board.
Alrighty, if I may, the hatched parcel you see in the middle of the page here, where the cursor is at, is the site of the current senior center that is moving the Gus Canty municipal complex. So the property that is here right now is being proposed for use by veterans. There's just a couple of minor issues is that, and once again, there's some things I can't explain. So when the senior center was built on this site, it wasn't actually an approved use. So they built the senior center in a place where the zoning wasn't the zoning for something like that. Additionally, the land that it was built on was purchased for school purposes. And so in the day, someone built a senior center on a piece of property that the town owned for school purposes, but not on a site that was zoned for it. So once again, we're fixing that. The school department has noted the property as surplus, so it can be used for other purposes. And at this point, we're looking at rezoning that piece of property to public use in order so it can be available for the veterans to use without any zoning violations. So our task before us is approving that zone, that change. Public hearing is open, and as we typically do, we have the public hearing, and we come back at our next meeting and vote those recommendations. So that is Article 19.
Now, is
Happy to
there
take
any
any
comment from the public in regard to this proposed rezoning? This is the senior center, and it's to rezone it to public use. The intention is that the veterans will be able to use this building. And so we're seeking to put proper zoning in place. Is there any public comment on this? Okay. Call the next one.
In a similar manner, there's an article to rezone parcel 1504027A021 at 64 Technology Park Drive from public use to light industrial B, or do or take any other action on this matter. On behalf of Mike Giordano, Falmouth EDIC. I think he's here. There he is.
Yes, yeah.
Mike, your picture's up there.
Okay, very good. So, thank you, first of all. As the board recalls, we were here in October requesting a zone change for 64 Tech Park Drive, which the EDIC owns. The EDIC, as you all know, is a nonprofit economic development corporation. We undertake projects like the solar array up at the landfill, renovation of Falmouth Station. We basically operate without town funds, and we generate fees off of our projects. And right now, we're looking at our real estate to see how we can try to maximize income production off the real estate. The water tower lot is currently zoned public use. If you look at the list of uses under public use, it's residential, there's some community service uses, there are no business and industrial uses. So we're proposing that we change the zoning to light industrial B, which would allow at least the possibility of business and industrial uses on that lot, similar to all the other lots that are around it. And at that point, we would, market the site as being able to have a business and industrial use, and we would see, what might happen with it. And that's really the genesis of this particular article. It is related to another article. I'm not sure what the procedure is, if we talk about that as well, or, no, okay, all right.
We'll do one article at a time.
Right, okay. So, I think that in a nutshell is it. I think when we were here last time, some of the abutters were saying that they would prefer to see this lot, if it were to be rezoned in a similar fashion, ILB, as the other lots around it. So we've kind of followed that path and listened to the comments, and that's why we filed the petition.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on, who wants to go first? Why don't you just sit right there in case there's anything they wish to ask you? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dan Webb. I'm here as an abutter to the lot. Our property owned by the Float Realty Trust is just south of the subject lot. I'm here to voice support for this article. As Mike mentioned, there was a previous effort back in the October 1st hearing. We discussed it, which was to rezone this lot as light industrial C. I spoke against that, and your board voted indefinite postponement on that. But this approach, I think, makes sense. The lot is entirely surrounded by light industrial B. To rezone it as light industrial B seems entirely reasonable, and so I would urge you to support that. Thank you.
Good evening, Matt Hanley. I live on Thomas Landers Road. My property abuts the industrial park. This drawing is pretty misleading. It shows the parcels, but that's not the whole story. Rezoning this parcel to light industry B would go in continuity with the surrounding properties, but that's basically a dead parcel of land. what's not shown on there, like every other, all the permanent structures in the industrial park are represented. But what's not represented is the water tower. And also what's not represented on this drawing is the topography of the property. This is really embarrassing that the EDIC thinks this is a good idea. The water tower is an eyesore as it is now. It's really a festering boil on the face of Falmouth. And to take away the screening for that water tower is gonna take away from the industrial park. So, I don't see, how this is gonna be a good idea. First of all, the slope of that property slopes to the north, so it's not good for solar array. Because of the topography of that property, it's not a really desirable buildable lot. The towns, the EDIC and the towns wasting their time trying to do something with this lot, why the water tower is still in place. If the water tower wasn't there, yeah, maybe then that lot would be usable. But as it stands right now, it's not. And, there's other parcels of land that the EDIC could work with the town of Falmouth. One of them being the waste treatment plant. We have the infrastructure in place already because of the wind turbines for power generation. And we have dead beds out there that not being used. So if the EDIC wants to come up with a good idea for power generation, let's look at the waste treatment plant. Let's put power where we have the infrastructure to absorb it. And let's hold off on this article until the water tower is decommissioned. But we just spent, $2.5 million to renovate this water tower? So God, I hope we're not taking this water town down in the near future. So this is a bad idea. Leave it public use. The town has made it perfectly clear with their parcels that they like to have it public use. So this is a town-owned parcel. Let's leave it public use.
Thank you for your comments. Did you want to say something further?
Yeah. To address the gentleman's point, the lot has about a 2.5 acre easement around the water tower, so anything we do on the perimeter, would not impact that easement or the water tower use. So that's I think the first point. The second point is, yes, when we were here before, we were talking about a ground mount solar possibility there, and that could still be a possibility, but only if the other article passes. But I think that the merits of rezoning this lot to the other lots around it, I think really kind of stands on its own. Because, we have a plan that shows that there could be approximately 9,000 square foot building on the edges of the site. But frankly, unless we can change the zoning, we have no possibility of talking to anybody about that, the abutters, or anybody really for that matter. So I think rezoning to L, light industrial B, would have no impact on the water tower operation, none whatsoever. And again, but it would allow us, at least in theory, to have other uses at the lot.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on this? Okay. Paul, the next one?
In a similar manner, the third article is to amend the Code of Falmouth, Chapter 240, zoning as follows. To Article 12, light industrial B districts, under Chapter 240-60, permitted business, commercial industrial uses, add, quote, 1, ground-mounted solar photovoltaic voltaics array, unquote. Under 240-62, permitted accessory uses, add, quote, C, ground-mounted solar photovoltaic array, unquote. Or do or take any other action on this matter. On behalf of Mike DiGiano, Falmouth EDIC.
So another consideration that we are seeking is to allow, as the article reads, ground mount solar to be allowed in this industrial zone, as it isn't allowed in the, it's also allowed in the light industrial C. And in some ways, we're kind of following the lead of many of the comments that we heard when we were here in the fall, that this kind of a use, both as a primary and an accessory, should be allowed there. I think many of the abutters in that district would want to see it. The only area in Falmouth where there is an LIB zoned lots are the Tech Park, a little over 100 acres. So the whatever visual impacts, if anybody has an objection to those, would be, you know, in and amongst really what is Falmouth's only industrial park in the entire town. And in terms of taking an opportunity for renewable energy, certainly that should happen in industrial parks. So we feel that it's consistent with many of the goals of the town.
Any public comment on this one? Mr. Webb?
Thank you. Dan Webb again. I have just a few comments in support of the proposed article. You know, this would create an opportunity both for the EDIC potentially to do something with the lot, but also for any other lots that are zoned light industrial B. So I think that makes sense. I think in general, allowing ground mount solar in industrial districts makes sense. It's pretty hard to argue against that. I know in the past, there's been some concerns about homes in proximity to solar farms, but as Mike pointed out, light industrial B district has no residential uses allowed. The Falmouth Technology Park is the only area in Falmouth zoned light industrial B. So there just isn't any housing in that park. Also, I wanted to point out, you know, light industrial B, the light industrial B district comprises 109 acres. That's less than 1/2 of 1% of the town's total zoning coverage. So it's a very small part of the town that's been set aside for an industrial purpose. So I would ask you to support this article. Thank you.
Mr. Hanley?
As the only residential abutter to the tech park, I actually am in support of this. Like other people have commented, you know, this is a technical park. It has no residential impact. My property is agricultural AA. You know, I'm for green power generation, and it makes real good sense to have power generation on parcels that could use the power, you know, but we need to be quite careful that with the ground mount solar, sometimes people can look at the big paycheck. I don't want to see, you know, our industrial land being eaten up by ground mount solar farms. You know, we have to put a stipulation on there that it's an accessory use. You can put, like the ice skating rink, you can put ground mount photovoltaic arrays above a parking structure that's a non-pervious. Parking structures, paved areas are non-pervious. The solar panels are non-pervious. It offers benefits to the businesses. You know, they're making power generation from what would just be a heat absorbing, you know, parking area. So I do support it, in long as we have mindful production. We're not taking down trees, we're not taking down screening, we're placing these, you know, photovoltaic arrays over existing parking areas. You know, so I would support it as the only residential property if we do this smart. We can't afford to lose any more industrial property in this town. So I support it on the existing properties that have already been developed, but I do not support it on the water tower lot, because you are gonna take down that green space, you are gonna expose that water tower, which is already an eyesore in the town of Falmouth. So, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Hanley, is there anyone else who wishes to comment on this? Okay. I will tell everybody who is here that I will ask for a motion to close the hearing on these 3 articles. So now is your time to say anything if you wish. And then at our next meeting on February 25th, the board will talk about these and vote on how we wish to recommend them to town meeting. So, anybody else? Now's your time. Okay, then I need a motion to close the hearing on these 3 articles.
So moved. Second.
Okay. Any discussion on the board? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And please remember that we're taking this up on the 25th to vote on it. Thank you all. Okay. We move on. Public discussion. Excuse me. The applicant is Bad Martha Farmers Brewery. Site plan review application to construct an addition to a commercial building located at 876 East Falmouth Highway, BSS Design. And we have Mr. Flower for the applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Kevin Clower. I'm an attorney with Ament Clower Law Firm here in Falmouth, and I represent the applicant Bad Martha Farmers Brewery, LLC. If you just bear with me for one moment here.
Kevin, you'll have to speak up just a little bit or
Of
more
course.
into the microphone.
Sorry, let me just get my bearings, and then I'll be all set to go.
Oh, look at that.
Good evening again, Madam Chair. As I mentioned, I represent Bad Martha Farmers Brewery, LLC, the owners of 876 East Falmouth Highway, and the applicants in this matter. I'm joined tonight by Tom Bunker of BSS Design, as well as Joshua Flanders and Ralph Younger, the GM and Assistant GM, respectively, of Bad Martha's. As the board knows, we're here tonight applying for a modification of the site plan review decision. We have been seeking 2 significant changes to the previously approved plan, specifically the installation of a raw bar shed and an addition on the north side of the building. However, following the last meeting, the applicant has listened and considered the comments made by the board and the public, and is now requesting to alter the proposed site plan review modification. As was set forth in my correspondence last week, they're withdrawing the request for the raw bar shed and located in the front yard, and have likewise proposed removing the bocce court. They are still seeking approval for the addition on the north side of the building, and they're seeking to retain the fire pit, which is adjacent to the patio. Further, they proposed the installation of a 6-foot stockade privacy fence to be erected across the front of the exterior area, essentially fencing in the lawn and the patio area. These changes are reflected on the plan submitted to the board last week. In addition, the owner, Jonathan Blum, has reached out to the abutters who have expressed concerns, Jody Whitehead and Deborah Packard. I don't know the details of those conversations necessarily, but I was told that they were going to be discussing past transgressions and how to work together moving forward. One discussion point that I know Mr. Blum was planning on raising was the possibility of Bad Martha working with the owners for installation of mitigation plantings on their site as well, to help with their concerns, not just with Bad Martha, but with Route 28 in general. This is and will be an ongoing discussion, and I just simply mention it to point out that Mr. Blum and Bad Martha in general are taking these concerns very seriously. He's very upset about how events have transpired and wants to make it right. At the risk of repeating myself from our last hearing, and in the correspondence we submitted, the applicant has instituted a number of steps and regulations to address the concerns relative to noise. They've hired a new assistant GM who's here with us this evening. His primary responsibility is the front of the house, essentially interfacing with customers and the public and ensuring that procedures and policies are adhered to. We discussed that written procedures for entertainment and music have been developed, posted, and distributed to all employees. All outside live music concludes no later than 6 p.m. Outdoor speaker volume is reduced at 6 p.m. and shut off entirely at 9 p.m. The exterior speakers have been moved to face the building in order to reduce the ambient noise, and they'll be placed within the fenced area, and that stockade fence is meant to serve as a sound barrier. With regards to the landscaping, the applicant would be amenable to a privet hedge or other foliage along the fence if the board would prefer. But as to the other landscaping on the site, our landscaper suggested that we provide the plantings with a season of growth to determine what additional plantings, if any, are necessary. As I noted, the plantings were done in the late summer and early fall. They've not yet had that season of growth, and adding additional plants at this point would only serve to crowd out the existing plants. Much as you would with the Conservation Commission plantings, the applicant will monitor the growth, repair and replace plants that aren't taking, and fill in bare areas as they're discovered, essentially. It's clear that an error was made. The landscaping plan that was in the approved package at the initial application stage was inadequate. We didn't submit a final plan. It was not, the applicant simply didn't realize they were intended to. There was no obfuscation, there's no malfeasance, there's no ill intent, it was a mistake that was made. The applicant's made a substantial investment, created a beautiful site, and wants to continue to improve his business, but to be responsible in doing so. We've sought to address the concerns that have been presented, and the applicant needs to move forward with the addition in order to have it done prior to, essentially, the summer season. Again, we've sought, I think, quite diligently to address the concerns that have been expressed and find a way of responding to them in an appropriate manner. I hope that you feel we've been able to do so. I, along with Mr. Bunker and Mr. Younger and Mr. Flanders, would be happy to address any questions the board or the public may have at this point.
I'd like to hear any comments from the board at this point. Have you had a chance to look at it? Did you go into the office? Were you able to go into the office and look at the new plan? Okay. Charlotte?
Kevin, could you point out where the fence will go?
I can. If you look right here, we show a stockade fence along the front of the outdoor area that's meant to kind of fence in the patio and the outdoor lawn area. And again, this bocce court's shown as to be removed, and
Right.
they're no longer proposing the shed in the front yard.
And you're proposing to add to the landscaping closer to the street?
So the intent with the landscaping closer to the street is really to give it a chance to grow in. They're happy to augment those plantings as necessary, but there hasn't been an opportunity for those plantings to come in. They were done in the late summer, early fall.
So it's keep the pit, take out the shed, put in the fence, and wait on the greenery.
And remove the bocce
I don't see
court.
where in here, in what you've written, the commitment or suggestion or anything about perhaps helping the neighbors screen on their side of the street. Was that part of your intent?
That was a conversation that happened today, so it wasn't part of what I submitted to the board last week. I think that is, as I mentioned, an ongoing discussion that'll take place. I don't know, quite honestly, I don't know if the neighbors want that to be done, and I don't want to presume that. But I did want the board to know that the owner has reached out and is seeking to correct what's occurred.
Paul?
I'd like to make a comment. I appreciate the efforts of the applicant to address the issues of the residents across the street. You deal with the light, with the sound, and that's terrific. Are you dealing with the lighting too? There's some issue about the lighting shooting across the street. Are you
Headlights.
toning those down as well?
So my understanding was that the concerns relative to lighting was actually headlights, not lighting on the site. Perhaps I'm incorrect in saying that, but I had not been aware of lighting on site being problematic. To the extent it is, I think the applicant, of course, is happy to take the appropriate steps to be compliant with whatever regulations we may have.
We tend to ask for more down lighting.
Sure. I think the lighting that was installed was whatever the lighting that was proposed as part of the original application process. I don't believe this has been brought up in the past, and if it has, my apologies. But I think that the applicant would be happy to take steps to make sure that the lighting is handled in an appropriate manner.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the photographs, did you see the photographs that the abutters?
No, I did not.
It looks as if the lights shine directly across the street, which I think could be ameliorated by having the down lighting.
I think that's an easy enough fix to make.
Well, the comment was also made that the lights are on all night, lighting an empty lawn and their spotlights, so. And
Right.
pictured it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And if it's for security, they could be motion detected.
totally.
You know, having watched this when it was proposed at the last meeting, I was home with this thing on me. My first thoughts were the screening, whether you do a bamboo curtain along the courtyard, or they've decided to put a fence, which is fine. I still think there needs to be a little bit more vegetation along the berm, and I know needs to take time to grow up, but then towards the ends of it, and if you're looking at the top view where the curb cut is, if it was stepped back, even with the berm, that would still give you enough visual looking down the road without any vegetation getting in the way. But I'm looking at the photographs of the parking lot with vehicles kind of extending beyond it. And as far as the music on the outside patio, I know down in Woods Hole, the landfall is constantly getting calls, and their music is inside, and people complain about it. And as a patron, I really could care less if there's music on the outside. I go to have conversations with friends. If I want to listen to music, I'd go inside. I really don't see a need for music on the outside myself. That's just a personal perspective. But the attempt to turn the speakers in might have some remediation of that, not sure. But
Anybody else?
If I can just,
Of course.
I think that, again, I think it's part of an ongoing conversation, and I think that the lines of communication have been opened
Yeah.
appropriately.
Yeah.
They weren't handled appropriately prior, and that's been acknowledged.
And I think everybody's working together. I don't.
And I think that the intent of any outdoor music is not to be entertainment, but just to be quiet background noise.
Yeah.
To the extent that there are any issues, that's something, that not only will the applicant have to deal with from a public relations standpoint, but in the renewal of their entertainment license.
Mitigation of sound, in my mind, probably, we've got, in our bylaws, we've got acceptable plantings. And the types of plants that are there, they could grow thicker and still not satisfactorily mitigate sound, I think, because an awful lot of them are deciduous. The original 3-foot berm was required because we were not told anything about sound coming out.
Music.
And we were concerned about headlights with the parked vehicles there shining into the neighbors across the street. And we thought a 3-foot berm should do it. Probably does, except for all the SUVs now that are higher. As I drive down the road, I'm blinded by these. I can't see because of them. So I think I think the applicant should look into non-deciduous plantings there too, that will thicken up. Like, I'm just throwing out arborvitae. I don't know if that's the best one. But
Sure. I will, one thing to point out, though, is that there is an existing privet hedge, which is going to be growing very substantially around the outside space. That, I think, coupled with the fence, will go a long way towards addressing the noise concerns. He thought that the fence located there would make more sense from a containment standpoint than a fence located along the street.
Definitely.
So, if the board wanted to see, I know that we've talked about arborvitaes in the past, that's one of the things that's mentioned. Fences are also mentioned. I think that with the steps the applicants proposed, coupled with the fence, I think it'll go a really long way towards addressing those concerns.
Okay. Charlotte?
I'm trying to relate the photograph, which is very useful, thank you. The plantings in the photograph to the plantings that I can sort of make out on the plan. And I'm having trouble doing it. It looks as if there are two to the left, there are two big fir trees of some sort, maybe firs. And yet, going down the line, you see how the plan shows from those circles that there are going to be at least 3 going across the front? Now I can see it better. Maybe it wasn't part of the plan. Okay, the 2 that are there, they do a pretty good job blocking, because they're very big, solid evergreens. But because there are only 2 and they're not balanced with the building, A, it doesn't look very good, and B, it leaves the whole right end of the building with all of those headlamps facing the houses. Is there a possibility in the berm, because the plantings that are there are smaller than the rocks and will be for a long time, several years, not just 1 year's growth, of adding big evergreens going down that line? Want to see the picture again?
I haven't seen the picture.
Yeah, come take a look. They're really informative. You keep those. I can look on with Pat's. I know those big trees are expensive, but it would really go a long way to shielding the neighbors.
Or even half that height, but still.
You'd want them to
Yeah,
match.
you want them to match, I know, but.
I think it's reflected here, it's reflected here, so I mean, the short answer is, of course, yes, that's a possibility. I don't have, I think that that can be, if that's a condition of the board, then that's a condition of the board. And it's one that, if that's the difference between this happening and not happening, I would tell my client that it should happen.
Right here.
I don't, the owner is not here right now.
He's not.
No, but the neighbors are.
Oh, we will.
He's in California presently,
John?
traveling.
I just want to say I'm really pleased to see the effort here.
I am too. Pam?
You know, what this makes me think is that in the future, that we maybe need to think about cars coming in and facing toward the building as opposed to facing abutters across the street. I guess they're not abutters, they're just across the street neighbors. There's no way to do it now because you'd have to drive in and back in. But I think in the future, that may be something we should think about when there are neighbors directly across the street and there's a heavy trafficked use, that we have the headlights facing,
Or put most of the
Onto the
parking in
building.
the back.
In the back.
well,
That's where it's
that was
supposed
that.
to be.
That's where it should have been, but,
No, there was some lessons learned with this.
oh, yeah. But I think if we could have those, as Charlotte said, those big fir trees across, that would be really helpful.
Well, just to clarify, I think Charlotte, Ms. Harris, was indicating that from a symmetrical standpoint, the addition of another tree would be beneficial. Are you referring to a line of those trees, or?
Eventually, it will make a line.
Sure, but I don't want to commit my client to putting in 6 of them.
I was thinking 2. 2 would look pretty good.
I think so, too. With something in between, yep.
Well, yeah, they have something in between, and they need to leave room for those things to grow anyway.
But they're tiny
But
little
take a look at the
things.
picture.
I've got it.
Yeah.
Tiny, tiny little plants.
No.
So what Charlotte's asking for is a balanced planting.
Big trees. Right, see right here?
These, right.
These triangles,
There should be
they're
another one.
practically in front of those lights.
But I'm saying these, if there's nothing here that's gonna,
They're never gonna mount much, they're too small.
that's what I'm saying.
Okay, Paul?
I thought the landscaping that was there this summer was excellent. I think it looked very, very nice. It complements Mahoney's next door. I think it's just the addition of something to protect the headlights. I think that's all we're talking
I
about.
think,
I don't think it's a major effort.
I think it's worth noting that these photos are certainly more recent, and I think that this landscaping is probably significantly more substantial than what we're seeing in these photographs. Having been there this summer, you can see, even in the foreground, some of the plants there that are bare, that obviously flower pretty substantially in the summertime. But I would stress to my client that the installation of another tree, if it's gonna get us there, that's something that we do.
Well, and they're also working with the neighbors across to mitigate that, is what you've
Yeah.
testified.
And again,
to.
I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth about how a conversation went or didn't go, but I know that it's ongoing.
Okay, if the board is finished with your comments, I'd like to move on to the public for any comments that you wish to make.
Deb Packard at 889 East Falmouth Highway. First off, I am appreciative of everything that the owner's doing to try and make life a little bit better for us over there. But I also want to say that, at least for me, the light is very low on the concern list. That's not an issue really at all. I like that it's lit up over there as far as the lighting that they have, because it's, for me, a safety issue. I like that they have it lit up at night. So for me, it's not the lighting issue, it's 99% the noise. So the noise is and will be what I'm concerned about, and hopefully we can get there. The fence, I hope, will make a difference. I think larger, thicker plantings will make a bigger difference. But that's it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to comment on this?
I'm Joni White, and we're 897 East Falmouth Highway, Jerker Cross. And I appreciate also the comments that we had from the owner and working together. We would never have been to here had this started at the beginning, where they would communicate back and forth with us, which never happened. Mine is the noise. And as I told the owner today, it's the volume. It's not where it is, it's the volume of it. It's just, you can't have a conversation. We can't even have a conversation on our porch because the volume is so loud. And there's no reason for that. The guests can't even have a conversation if I can hear it across the street. So that's my big one, is just the volume.
Thank you. Okay,
Should we make a motion to close the hearing?
well, it's a site plan review, so we don't close it. We have to take it up for, our last meeting is on the 25th, so we need to have a decision ready on the 25th, or ask for an extension, I believe.
Well, and I guess I'm not exactly clear on what that would involve.
Correct, so we'd have to have a slight discussion here tonight to
So
give
when
you
I,
some hint.
when I look at the performance standards for residential buffers, option number 2 is the one that incorporates a fence. And so that option is 1 row of evergreen trees, at least 6 foot high, planted at intervals recommended from the approved list, and faced with a row of shrubs at least 3 foot high, and then with a fence. So it sounds like what's being proposed is a fence and a couple of trees. All of these options appear to consist of a row of essentially not having gaps. The row, of course, the row grows in. So if one of those strategies for screening things is a fence, is the fence going to screen something noise-wise, just as a stockade fence without the additional plant types and things like that? So when we officially looked at this, I think everyone's expectation was we were looking at a brewery, and you know, breweries are sort of a place where people make beer and then leave. I don't know that anybody anticipated the amount of activity outside the brewery. So this is the board's second chance, as you said, to look at what that mitigation is. So are we, you know, is a fence and no rows of plantings sufficient to screen it? And I don't know that a sound engineer developed these performance standards for landscaping, the buffers between residential and business uses. But it clearly states that this buffer is required between business and residences. A buffer will protect the abutting properties from glare, noise, dust, fumes, heat, and traffic. So once again, my concern is if we've got a standard, it's in the zoning. Are we meeting that standard? Are we hoping for the best with a fence? You know, that's just where you know, where we're at. And as we talked about before, under site plan, we don't put hours of operation and we don't have parameters for outside speakers and things like that. Ours are screening and buffering, and those are the tools that we have.
I would like to just make the comment that I don't think a fence would be sufficient. You need the softening of the reverberation. Reverberations. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's
Up here.
yeah.
It's up here.
You need the softening of the plants that they would do for the sound, I think.
Yeah.
So I think the fence and a row of evergreens, preferably on the inside towards the brewery, I think, of the fence.
Yeah.
And then the fence on the outside of that.
They do have fencing where there is a baffle
Right.
on one side of the fence that absorbs noise. They have them along the highways, which is not what I'm suggesting, but they have those types of fencing.
If I may, there is a substantial privet hedge, which is on the inside of the fence. I understand that's not a row of evergreens, but it is a substantial privet hedge, and again, with another year of growth, that will go a long way towards softening that noise as it comes to the fence. I think that the particular site layout perhaps doesn't lend itself to the performance standard that Mr. Bott just referenced, but I think that if you have the privet hedge and the fence, and we do have some substantial planting along the street front, we're talking about an area that's set back fairly substantially from the street as is, then with the berm, the plantings on the berm, the fence, the privet hedge. I think there's a pretty substantial layering of buffering.
I think that should do it for me. I think that should do it. But
So,
Bob?
yeah, I agree. The privet hedge is there with the fence on the street side of that. I'm not a landscaper, and I don't pretend to be one for the purpose of this board, so for us to say you need 6 evergreens, I don't think that's our call to make. I think a landscaper who is told that the problem is we want to prevent headlights from going across the street and maybe act as an additional sound buffer, they could make that type of recommendation and decision. I don't think we should tell them we want X number of trees or this kind of bush or anything like that.
I know from my own experience with privet fence and privet hedge in front of our house, it takes a good bit of upkeep to look nice. So I don't know whether your client is going to be into that kind of upkeep on that.
It's, I think they're very substantially invested in making sure that the landscaping at the site continues to look as good as it does, because it is what catches the eye as you come, and it's what I think makes it goes from a cool use to a beautiful use.
You have to be careful that if we tell them to do something and they do it and it doesn't work, then where
Right.
are we?
That's the problem.
So,
Well, where we are is we've enforced our standards. That's where we would be.
right, but
And
what I'm
where
saying
they
is
would
we
be
shouldn't,
is
we
they
shouldn't
met
be,
the standard.
we shouldn't be
That's not a bad
dictating,
place to be.
we shouldn't be dictating what kind of plants in order
But
to do
we have
that.
standards that do that. We already have that. That's not,
Well, what
us
I
as a-
heard here is we need one more evergreen here and one over here. I don't wanna get into that.
It was an aesthetic suggestion.
Yes.
it wasn't just an aesthetic suggestion. It wouldn't spoil your layout. If you were to do that, it might even improve it, but it wasn't only aesthetic. If you had 2 large triangular evergreens, you're going to really do a lot for blocking the noise, blocking the light, but I didn't know we had that standard. I should have known, I didn't know. It was interesting to hear that we have that and have it as a standard. So it's not a new invention.
No,
No, it's not a new invention. And what they're proposing there, I assume that's the site plan amended for this suggestion,
This is the
right?
landscape, this is the amended landscape plan, which
Correct.
is now part of the
And as
file.
I'm looking at it from here, maybe not seeing it right, the fence is to the right, the privet is right behind it. Is that intended to extend all the way across in front of the fire pit also?
Yes, so the fence you see runs from essentially the walkway on the left-hand side of the property.
Can you use the mouse, Kevin?
Of course.
Point it out.
Yep, you can't see me pointing in my pen, can you? The fence is intended to run from the left-hand side of the layout by the walkway, this is the parking area
Yeah.
on that side, across the entirety of the front.
So it's the red line?
Yes.
And where is the privet?
Privet hedge is, you'll see it right here, is the little cloud shape that runs.
All in front, that's great, but I don't think that that would really, privet's deciduous. so that that's only for part of the year. Does it have a buffering effect for noise? You could also add, see the space between now move out to the planting, that as I recall, when you were presenting this, that was intended to continue the planting in front of Mahoney's. It was going to continue that look.
We wanted to continue the same idea of the landscaping in front
Right,
of
which is a
Mahoney's.
beautiful look, right. But Mahoney's has grown up, it has gotten thicker, but even there are gaps and openings in between. And if you were to use the land behind the berm, not just the berm for planting, you can put more tall things back there to make, in effect, a continuous barrier as suggested by the landscaping standard.
I would, again, suggest that what we're proposed with the trees along the front and the fence and the privet hedge to, again, as Ms. Kerfoot mentioned, soften that noise prior to the fence, I think is probably I'm not a sound engineer, but my understanding is that will go an awful long way towards addressing this concern. That coupled with the other steps that the applicant has agreed to take, has proposed and has already instituted, I think is a very substantial amelioration of the noise concerns.
I think at this point, personally, Paul, you want to say something?
Yeah, what I'm hearing from two of the neighbors here, that the principal concern is noise. And the issues in your letter on timing of it and turning the speakers down will go a long way to addressing this as a non-structural alternative. We're talking about fences and types of plants. I think if they address the issues in your letter, I think that would go a long way to solving the problems
I agree.
the concerners have.
That's true.
Thank
So, okay, then what I'm hearing is fence, privet sound seems to be okay on the inside towards the brewery, then fence, then put a couple of large evergreens also to help block both the sound and the noise. I mean, the sound and the lights.
And continue working with the neighbors.
And continue working with the neighbors, absolutely.
Yes.
So could we make a decision and ask for?
Well, we'll have the decision on the 25th, so we
Well,
will
we have
vote
to
the
ask
decision
for it.
on the 25th. That's what we're doing right now, because Tom said he needed more definition. Because we don't have any purview over speakers as part of our site plan review, I don't know how or if we can put it into our decision. What do you think, Tom?
I'm that person who says you should stay in your lane.
That's what I'm thinking. So we're staying in our lane. This is what they're planning to do. And so if our lane doesn't sufficiently take care of it, I'm assuming we will once again hear from the neighbors. And then what do we do?
The neighbors actually have a different venue to go to on the noise.
Oh, they do, yes.
And if this doesn't solve it, then they've got other licenses here that the selectmen deal with, and the noise complaints, and they should be able to deal with them there. You know, we deal with fencing and planting.
My hope is that that's not the case.
Yeah, well,
As I've mentioned,
you'll find out.
we're trying to make sure the lines of communication here are open.
And I think we gotta give this stuff a year to grow too. I mean, we're really we're hammering this landscaping in, and I would like, in 2 years, the fence and the privet, even in the wintertime, gets gnarly and woody and does a good job of blocking things. I don't know if you've ever had a privet hedge. They're tough as hell.
They are awful. They're wonderful, because they just keep on spreading if you don't keep them under control.
They do a really good job of blocking. I think we
Okay.
should give them a chance.
So our decisions, it seems to be from what we can do is, okay, they're removing the bocce court. They're putting the privet planting in along a fence, a stockade fence.
We're accepting that plan,
That
plus a
plan,
couple of big
plus a couple-
evergreens.
Yeah, okay. And we are fine with their storage shed in the back. Is that,
It's an addition, I just want to.
It's an addition.
It's an addition, it's not a.
Right.
I just want to clarify.
no, I understand that, but it's for storage.
It's
So I-
attached, it's not,
Yes.
it's
Attached,
part of the building.
okay? So that's what our decision will reflect, that we will be voting on the 25th.
So I've got a note, privets 1, hedge 2, couple large evergreens? Is there a couple large evergreens
Well,
in
a
there?
privet hedge plus stockade fence. privet and hedge are
They're on the
one and
plan.
the same,
Privet's already
yes.
there.
So I,
It's on
sorry,
the-
I got privet, I got fence,
We shouldn't be picking the plan.
and a couple large evergreens on my list.
Mm-hmm.
So are there a couple large evergreens being added to this site? And where?
To the right.
In the front berm, to balance the other,
In
the
this general
two that are on the other side. Paul?
Just gonna say, I agree with Bob, we shouldn't be picking plants, because what if it doesn't work?
Well,
So I don't think it's our purview to be picking the type of plants and
We
the
didn't, we
location
just
of
said
those
large
plants.
evergreen.
essentially, we're accepting their landscape design right now and saying, please add a couple more to balance it.
And letting them keep the fire pit.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it is entirely out of our lane, but I think it would be, give the board some comfort if by the time they come back in 2 weeks, that they had some sort of idea what they might be doing on the neighbor's property, if anything, if there's any agreement to that point, that to mitigate the things that we're doing, what they might be doing across the street. Like I said, if that plays out at all. But it just may give the board a bit more comfort to go, okay, we did our part, and they're doing their part. But that's
But that's
Totally
purely
outside of our-
voluntary, we can't say
Totally-
anything about it.
totally outside of our lane.
I'm
So
happy to report back as to any progress.
Get on.
So I think we're good to
Yeah.
go for the decision for the 25th,
Great, thank you very much.
okay?
Oh, my God.
Okay,
We have
next.
standards.
Talk about beating a dead horse.
I know. The applicant is Diane Durso, site plan review application for a detached accessory apartment located at 128 Locust Street. And for the applicant, please.
You want notices?
Are there notices? There should be, yeah. All,
Public meeting notice was published on January 24, 2020, and 11 butters were notified by regular mail. Excuse me.
for the applicant.
Good evening. My name is John Wambach. I'm representing Diane DeRusso, a friend of mine, trying to assist her in this project. Diane, I think you submitted all the paperwork for you guys, and pictures and site plans and stuff. Not, the AV guy over here. He was back in high school in '73.
I used to just run the film projector, and it goes, nice, advance it up. You had more skills than I did.
I think something like this, where there's already a structure, shouldn't have to go to the ZBA. If you're building something else.
Chances are, you can just
not if
keep
it's
scrolling down,
existing.
see the sort of thumbnail right?
It's not a living,
No,
it's not a dwelling unit.
no, I understand that.
Scrolling down.
Little background. Diane purchased the property in August of 2017. And in about April of 2019, she was informed that the building was non-conforming because when it was built by the prior owner, he took his barn and turned it into a carriage house. That's why she bought it, so she could have a place to bring her children and her grandchildren, to a place to, when they can stay, when they visit her, they can stay. They did a lovely job of it, and we found that there's no permit, so I went to the building department, trying to find the process to get the electrical and plumbing and everything, you know, going backwards to it. They brought us to the accessory lot first. So she bought the property and found it was non-conforming, so we want to get it into position to make it legal in the town of Falmouth. So that's, I don't know what you want me to show that you already have in front of you, or for the public, you want me to scroll down and show you any of the plans, any of the, submitted pictures of the property, the layouts of the existing house, the layouts of the carriage shop with carriage
Do
house.
we have any pictures? Have you seen?
Yeah, we did. They were in the planning office.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would venture to say they're probably there if we scroll.
It might be here. Right. These are the, let's see. This is the second floor here of the property. This is the first floor, and this is the attic, which for real estate purposes, they listed it as a 4-bedroom house. If you walk into this attic, it's like climbing a ladder, the steps from the kitchen. I fell down twice. The window in the room, the attic room upstairs is 18 by 12, which is non-conforming to for the building department as an egressable window, which could be considered a bedroom. I wouldn't sleep up there. There's no heat in there, there's no ventilation except for that little window. It is an attic, and then we submitted some pictures of the interior of the house, so you can see it.
We're gonna see them? Or we see these pictures?
Let me see if I,
The public presentation,
Okay.
there we go. That's what I was hoping
here's
to
the
see.
exterior of the house,
Thank you for bearing with us.
and that's from the driveway and parking area side,
Needed to know where they were.
and that's the back side of the house. And that is this here is the garage that they made into the carriage house. And another side of the carriage house. And see if we get any more pictures, interior pictures. I don't think they put them on. That looks like the last picture. Looks like
There
they
were only
only
pictures
showed
of the exterior.
exterior pictures. I don't have anything else up here.
Questions on size? How big is the main structure?
The main structure is about 1,856 feet, depending who's using
And
what.
how big is this?
This is 632.
Okay,
And
so it meets the guidelines for 40%?
It meets the guidelines.
It's already there.
It was built, the structure originally is about 30-something years old, from the best of paperwork that we found. This was done prior to her buying the property. The guy did, and I'm the local jack of all trades, I went in, I was quite impressed with the work that they did inside. A couple of things that should be changed. So, other than that, it's not really, it's got a loft, it's got a spiral staircase, it goes into a loft upstairs, it's got a full bathroom, it's got a kitchen sink, it doesn't have a kitchen stove or any electrical electricity to have an electric stove there. And she has a refrigerator, and she has yet to use it, because the children are out, have a visitor yet from out of the state. So she just we wanna go back and make sure it complies with everything. First of as the accessory building, then the building department go through, we probably have to open up the walls, so they go back and inspect the electrical work, the plumbing work, and structural engineer coming from the building department to get this, to do it, we're going backwards.
I watched the whole thing happen. I live across the street, and when I saw it being sold that way, I just shook my head, because I know the zoning, but it just was sold that way, and what she's doing is gonna fix it. Make it right.
That's what we're
Yeah,
attempting to do.
making it right. And I want to point out, the zoning here is also general residential, which allows for two structures on one lot. But they're supposed to be attached. But our accessory apartment bylaw, so the two structures are allowed by right, but they're not attached. But our accessory apartment bylaw allows it to be detached. And I think it's a perfect solution
I do too.
for this
Paul?
problem.
Paul?
I drove over this afternoon, and I thought it fits all the requirements, not only the setbacks and the look of the building and everything. I thought it fits right in with what we were trying to do as
She
accessory.
currently, she had the driveway redone this year to add parking, and there's some paving blocks connecting the buildings for like an outdoor patio to be continued in the spring.
Yeah, I was over there this afternoon. Thank you.
Bob?
Yeah, I think when we first proposed this bylaw, one of the things we were hoping to do was to bring in the ones that weren't quite legal, and this is the perfect definition of that.
Exactly what we wanted.
And I'm happy to see this. I think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you.
I don't have any problems with it. Does anybody have any problems with this?
No, I think it fits exactly what our
Right.
bylaw was meant to
Right,
do.
and we should stop there, too,
Yep.
because it's the stuff inside's the building department
Yep.
stuff, not ours.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
and the
That's
water
right.
connection and all that kind
Yeah,
of
that's somebody
stuff,
else's
so-
job.
And
Well,
it
they-
fits in with the
they
local
led me to you.
comprehensive plan as
Yeah,
well,
Absolutely.
you know, with where it's located. It's located close to downtown on Main Drag, so.
That's great.
It's
Walked
good.
it everywhere, it's a great place for another house.
Yep.
So, are we going to be ready to have a decision next week?
We
I mean,
are.
not in 2 weeks, on the 25th, on this?
I'm feeling the vibe that the board would like a positive recommendation.
Yeah, we could do it yesterday, but I think we need to wait 2 weeks, so. Thank you. Appreciate your
Good luck.
Yeah,
efforts.
well done.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay.
We'll wait for the open house.
Okay, next is, again, it's a detached accessory apartment. The applicant is Ronaldo Andrade, site plan review application for a detached accessory apartment located at 209 Courier Road and John Doyle Associates.
Notice.
Yep, notice.
Notice of public hearing was published on 1/24/2020, and 6 abutters are notified by regular mail for this site plan review.
For the applicant?
Yeah, I'm representing my mother, I'm not sure, I gave all the information that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And I brought some photos just of the house.
Do you have anything to show us up there? Did you bring PDFs or pictures for people at home to see?
It's, I submitted everything to the planning department, so there's blueprints for the building that's gonna be.
We don't have any digital
proposed building,
pictures of that.
Blueprints for the existing building. I brought everything, and gave 5 copies or 6 copies.
I just want to point out, in the past, we made a ruling, a practice that everything would be submitted digitally so it could be shown to people at home. And they're not doing that, and if we, I don't want to go backwards.
These are just pictures of the house, of the existing property.
Okay.
And, I gave, like I said, I brought in, blueprints of that existing property and of the proposed, accessory apartment that would be located in the front lot. It's a completely open vacant lot. It's about, probably at least 3/4 of an acre in size. And, it's gonna be far enough off the road, it's gonna be far enough off of any property lines. It meets all the regulations as far as, size for the structure in front compared to the size of the existing.
What are the numbers? How big is the existing house?
The existing house is about 3,000 square feet.
Okay, and then the other one's less than 800?
Yes.
Then, okay.
And it's on a 92,950 square foot lot,
Yes, it's over 2 acres.
Yeah,
so it's,
My only objection is 2 years ago, we made a policy that we were gonna start
Yes.
seeing, and I don't wanna go backwards on that. If you guys don't care, that's up to you.
it's not a not caring. It's possible that the photographs are there.
They're
because
not.
they
He
were in the
did-
previous
no,
one.
he said
They're
they didn't
not?
submit anything digitally.
No,
I have all the blueprints for the accessory apartment here on my
so
phone.
those are on the screen. You can
We're
scroll.
trying to look at,
If I may for just a moment. So,
were they informed that that was a requirement?
we do our very best to accommodate all the folks who come in, particularly for a resident-driven.
What's the answer, yes or no?
I did not speak directly with the applicant.
Okay,
I asked if there were going to be pictures. I did not confirm that there were digital pictures. In the event of a professional presentation from an engineer or an architect, we would expect them to comply with those absolutely because of the repetition and the many
or
times that they've
just
been here
like the
before.
previous applicant did, is show us
But
pictures.
in the case of this, we've got a resident who's trying to do something on their house, and if they didn't get the digital pictures from them, shame on the staff. We'll try to make sure those things happen.
I bring it up every time it happens, so.
That's the accessory apartment.
Just scroll through it.
Oh, I'm
Give
sorry,
it
I
to
didn't.
That's it.
Well, we're getting there.
I apologize, I've never done this
The
before, so
site
I didn't know
plan.
what I was.
don't worry
That's
about it.
okay, don't worry about
I
it.
just pulled up the
Thank you.
pictures on my phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the
This
site
way
plan
you're
for the
proposing.
proposed structure.
God,
It'll have a 2-car garage in the
a lot of
front,
work there.
with an accessory apartment up top.
They didn't like my
Um,
sign in front of my house.
This is the structure that's already there, this is the house that's already there.
Okay.
you're a big fella, you can take that kind.
With the layout, this is the layout of the interior of the house that's already there. And there should be pictures of, and this is the interior of the proposed,
Here's pictures.
Thank you.
accessory
Okay,
apartment.
this is much better.
I'm
At least
sorry
you can
about
see
that.
it. What about, is this in the front yard?
Yes,
That's the thing about it,
Is
it's in
it-
the front yard.
Well, it needs is it more than, is it 50 feet, Tom, the zoning?
significantly further than 50 feet from the road.
So it doesn't need a special permit for a structure in the front yard because it's
So
setback?
if we can go back to the site plan, May,
Sure.
I think it's 170 feet back from the road.
It's way
Then
back.
it's all set.
It is.
It's pretty far off the road. The only reason that we're going through this process now is because the land was actually acquired during a land swap through Eversource Electric. And we actually didn't own, well, my mother didn't actually own that front lot originally. When she that lot was actually a buildable lot that they were trying to sell. North Star Construction was trying to sell it. And when Eversource began coming in and doing work on the power lines, they came over and talked to my mother, and they asked her if she would be interested in a land swap. They wanted to acquire the land along the power lines, which she owned, and they were willing to give her that front lot as a trade, and she agreed to it. So that's the only reason why we're at this point now. Otherwise, it would, obviously the house, if we had it originally, the house would have been built further forward, and the accessory apartment would be put behind it like it's supposed to be.
Makes perfect sense.
So if I can just intervene
Sure.
here. So this is the
Just scanned
plan,
those, it would've been fine.
this is the site plan for the property. Here you see that the structure, the proposed building, garage and apartment is 187 feet from the frontage. So Courier Road, 187 feet to the frontage. So that's the structure. Structure has a porch on it, and the porch is to the rear of the structure. So when you come and look from the street, this, where it says left elevation, that is what you'll see from the street. This is what you'll see from the house, so the porch is to the rear of the house. So this faces the street. This faces the driveway.
Correct.
This faces the house, the existing house.
Yeah, that's right.
It looked to me when I went to the planning department to see what was on the agenda, that it met all of our requirements, and the only issue was the front yard, but the front yard is so enormous that it's way, way back, and the part that's facing the street is fine, so it's,
And it's a garage. and
It's a
they-
garage, right.
And we want housing above garages, it's part of the bylaw.
so it's, looks
So I
great.
think it's good.
And it matches the design of the
Matches
existing
the
house.
design.
Right.
Doesn't look like a duplex or anything, it looks very
It's
appropriate.
fine, yeah.
It's a stunning property, and I think, done the way you're proposing, it's gonna be a great addition to the accessory apartments that we need so desperately.
Is it fair to make the assumption that your mom lives there year-round?
At the house?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I figured it was, but.
I'm gonna be
Yes.
just, I'm just gonna be helping her. Her family are contractors in town, so they're gonna be the ones that are building it. And, I own a landscape company in town, so, we've done the property already. I've done all the landscape work there as far as, pool, irrigation, walkways, patios, all that stuff. And the front is gonna match the back, we're gonna make it look really nice for her, so.
The stonework looks beautiful.
It does, doesn't it?
What is this part about addition of dry wells or stormwater? We don't need to deal with that, do we?
Well, that is the engineering division's review, and their concern is when you're improving a driveway, does that driveway put more water onto the street? So in the grading and drainage plan, and this is where I have talked about this before, where we start to get into site plan review on single-family residences, which makes me a little uncomfortable. But
I was just reading a caption, forget I ever mentioned it.
But at the same time, as the engineering division says they need since there will be no driveway permit from engineering, we would recommend conditions be made by any approval for site design C and G, essentially assuring that those dry wells are put into place to kind of minimize the amount of water coming off the site. So no driveway permit required for this. The engineering division has noted that because water's gonna come down the hill, they would like to see that some of that drainage not go directly to the roadway, but instead be placed in dry wells or rain gardens.
Yeah, and their concerns were also during the construction phase, which you do anyways, whether it's compost socks or hay bales or whatever, and that's a matter of course, so.
They're also looking at an erosion problem washing the driveway down into the street.
The
I'd have to
driveways,
assume it would be a good idea to take care of that from your,
right, well, on one side of the driveway, I've already built a retaining wall coming up on the right side of the driveway. And, what I planned on doing was was in, you know, when you look at it from the front, I'm gonna do it, you know, because where it slopes down, we've been building it up and putting some fill in.
Okay.
And I'm gonna build another retaining wall across the front of the property. I've already done, I just had the driveway redone last year, so the driveway's brand new. I put cobble edge along it, we graded it, you know,
Yeah, we don't have anything to say, I'm
Oh.
just saying, this is the engineering, and I'm assuming you're gonna take care of it for your own sake.
yeah, absolutely, yes.
John?
You may not know, but we have pictures of previous years before the driveway was paved.
Yeah.
And the dirt washing out onto the
Right,
road.
right, that's the reason why we
That's been
redid the driveway,
That's been
yes.
eliminated. so-
Yes, and the main problem was on the right side, where the retaining wall was put in. It was washing and breaking apart, so I built a 150-foot retaining wall going up the entire right side of the driveway.
Do you have copies of the engineer's report?
Of the engineer's report,
The town engineer?
for the driveway?
Yeah, for anything regarding the site.
We'll get you one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it'd be good to have that, just so you're not caught off guard.
So what I'm gathering from the board's comments right now is you would like to see a positive decision on the 25th,
Exactly.
correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think you can hear that. Okay, so we'll be looking for a positive decision from our staff to be voted on the 25th for this accessory apartment.
2 weeks to do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You
You
too.
too.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a lot of stuff here under planning board discussion. The first is request for administrative approval for the Nimrod at 100 Dillingham Avenue. Corey, I think you're speaking to this, correct?
So, the applicant, is looking to, Assistant Town Planner Corey Pacheco. So the
Could you speak
applicant's,
up a little bit?
so the applicant's looking to revise the site plan approval. So instead of, renovating the existing Nimrod, they're looking to, demolish it and reconstruct it as it looks currently. They've submitted, these are renderings that were a part of the original approval. And this is essentially the Nimrod renovated with additions to it. And here's the other structure that's on the property that was part of the original site plan approval. So essentially, the builder's looking to have the board potentially have this done and approved administratively instead of coming for another public hearing.
What was this before?
Corey, will some of the things that were originally going to be retained and reused in what was going to be the reconstruction, is that still part of this plan? Do you have any idea?
Certainly is on there.
According to the builder, yes. So essentially what was originally proposed, the architecturals showing the renovation of the Nimrod, he's going to build according to what was originally approved. He'll reconstruct the Nimrod. As far as architectural details, there's not really any exploded details showing whether or not he's going to return, the pediment, portico, in terms of the detailing to that, like dentils, and return the correct columns that are there, essentially. So maybe he could come back before you guys and kind of clarify those issues or clarify it with staff.
Well, the things
So-
that I remember is that there was an antique mantle in there, and of course, there was the cannonball.
Yeah,
and-
But
yeah.
that's all interior,
That's interior, correct.
right?
Yeah.
Paul?
I just had a question. What's before us today is just administrative approval to take that building
Yep.
down.
Mm-hmm.
We're not dealing with the other issues at this time.
No, not at all. So he's essentially modifying the site plan. So staff reviewed it as an essentially a modification to a previously approved site plan. So it's up to you guys whether or not you want him to come back before the board to present and kind of explain the project, what, the
Well, I agree,
modification.
it's in terrible shape, and it's a danger, it's an eyesore and everything else. I think it should be removed. The question is, usually the building inspector issues a building permit to take down the structure, isn't that right?
Correct.
So why are we even discussing it except administratively?
He's modifying a site plan that you guys approved in 2017, so he's following condition 1 of your site plan approval.
As I understand, the original idea was to demolish parts of the structure and rehab the buildings that would remain. In this case, nothing's gonna stay. Taking it down to the terra firma and rebuilding in place.
Nothing to save.
They do have a demolition permit for the whole thing.
Well, Charlotte?
I support this. I think it should be an administrative matter.
I do too, so I would
So I'd move.
entertain a motion.
Yeah, I'd move to honor the request for administrative approval for the demolition of the Nimrod at 100 Dillingham Ave.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye. And also let it be noted, it is on the list of significant buildings, so it would require a waiver from the Historical Commission to demolish before the 12-month period.
They have it.
Okay, well, I'm not aware of that, so, you know, I need to talk to the
You were
building
around,
commissioner.
But I was. They have a demolition permit and the waiver.
They don't have the waiver.
No,
They-
well,
they
I was
need a wa-
present when they got the demolition permit and the waiver for the, going the whole, the 6 months at the time when they got it.
They may or may not, but we don't need to settle that now.
Right.
I'd just like to add to the record, this building as it is, the sooner they take it down, the better, because it's being used by homeless people. I'm sorry they don't have a home, but vagrants are using the building, and it's a dangerous situation. So anything we can do to expedite their improving this would be a good thing.
What's that, there's a legal, constructive nuisance or something?
Attractive.
Attractive, whatever that is. I mean, that is a prime example of
It's no one's
people
fault.
shouldn't be living in there.
This is only because of a tragedy to the original developer, so that they're trying to move it along.
Yeah.
So we've just voted it.
Yes.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Determination of access policy.
Alrighty, this is not in your packet this evening. Just to give you a recap, when we last talked about the determination of access policy and the idea of requiring a 25-foot right-of-way, there was some pushback from the board on that. So I went to engineering and said, well, here's what we have. If the fire chief needs 16 feet of pavement and needs 20 feet clear, what's the smallest area that you guys, engineering, can see to put that in place and also have room for drainage structures and things like that? Because when we do a road improvement, even on an ancient way or a cart path, we want to make sure we're not washing out the neighbors. Their point was, well, the fire department needs 16 feet, but other vehicles use the driveway as well, and they think it's more appropriate to have 10-foot travel lanes, 2 10-foot travel lanes. And if that was the case with 2 10-foot travel lanes and still trying to get those drainage structures, and what's that minimum amount of width? So the DPW and I have continued to have this conversation, and I'll have something formulated for you when we get back to this next time around. But we had conversations about it, but didn't get to the point where we had a resolution to bring you something back to talk about. But the 25-foot right-of-way, you didn't care for, but the fallback from those discussions may not be much different from 25 feet in order to get all those things in place. So when we've got something formalized, we'll bring it back for the board's consideration. So right now, we're still in the discussion of what's that minimum area that you can put something in, because we are essentially allowing these things. This is the 3 types of ways that you have, subdivision ways, those ways approved prior to, and in a cart path like this. Under subdivision control, the whole premise is to make sure there's an adequate and safe way to get to property that people are going to build on and live on.
This is to change the 18 feet.
Correct. So we're taking a long view at it and making sure that have a handle on the particular issues. rather than just kind of keep nudging along and going, oh, we didn't consider this and didn't consider that. So, much thoughtful discussion.
And Tom always points out to me, the planning board can do a waiver of whatever requirements we put in if we deem it beneficial to the town to waive some of the requirements. So we'd be looking at what is the best, and knowing we could, if necessary, waive it.
You don't want to put in something just because you know you're going to waive it most of the
No,
time.
no. I'm not even
Right.
implying that.
Let's say we had to deal with another Lewis Neck.
Right,
Probably will forget.
for example.
Right, okay? We need to have the requirements that are necessary to make safe travel and to allow people to live safely and travel safely on that
Without losing the
access.
country character of some roads.
True,
So it's a
That's-
balance.
right, okay? Subdivision regulations.
All right.
Again,
In the back of your packets, you have two documents. One says inspections and one says fee schedules. So regarding the inspections protocol, so this is, the top sheet is what we currently have as the requirements for inspections. The second sheet in red for strikeouts and blue for additions are those changes to the subdivision inspection protocol. So these are the same ones that we looked at maybe a couple months ago. To note that prior to construction, you're gonna have a pre-construction conference. Everybody's gonna sit down and make sure everybody understands what's going on there, and then how you go about calling for inspections. So those 4 inspections that we previously have are replaced by the 11 inspections that you'll see on the back of that red and blue paper. So this is exactly the same information that we provided before, and it includes the Form D, the subdivision inspection checklist. So for each inspection, there's a check sheet that comes out and says we inspected, this particular area at this particular time. So that is the inspection protocol that we've discussed previously. This is sort of languished a couple times because as we've had other things going on, we've let it sort of roll to the side. But we're at a position right now where we want to formalize this inspection protocol because one of the things going on another channel are the number of 40Bs that are being developed. And we would very much like to, working with the Zoning Board of Appeals, have an inspection protocol we can give to the 40B developers and say, you need to do the roads the way it says, because most of the time they come in and say, we're building the road to subdivision standard. We hear this all the time from the folks who are doing 40Bs. So within that subdivision standards, we want to make sure that they're properly installed and properly inspected. So in the case of the Zoning Board of Appeals, they would render a decision and say, you'll build the roads to the subdivision standards and you'll have them inspected as required. So us adopting of this 11-step inspection protocol will benefit our subdivision regulations as previously discussed with the engineering division, and also benefit the 40B developers so they understand exactly how they have to go about building and inspecting those things to make sure that we don't have those lacks of potholes and compressions and lack of compaction and all those things we've seen in the past. So this produces for us a more robust inspection protocol that's been reviewed by our engineering division, and everyone was on, everyone internally was on board that the board was a little concerned about, are someone gonna have to go out there and do 11 different inspections? Some of these things can be batched together, some of them are individual inspections, but most of them are, sort of twofers or threefers, you go out and inspect those things.
Paul? You wanted to say
I'm gonna
something?
make a comment on the proposed regulations. It says the town planner, Falmouth Engineering Division, board's inspector. Which board are they referring to there?
Well, in this case for subdivision regulations, it's the planning board. So whether the board's inspector is the DPW or whether the board's inspector is a 53G consultant, it would be whoever has been designated to do the inspections.
Why don't we just say a representative of the town department, planning division, and appropriate town parties?
Probably because we stole these from somebody else, but we can amend them to.
I don't think we should identify town planner having to be required to attend that, I think the representative should be
Well,
there.
when we have a new development, it is fairly standard practice for the town planner who sort of who worked through the review process to be there to ensure that the developer understands those conditions and the protocols for asking for inspections, so there's no confusion. So I would
I'm not
absolutely,
excluding him, it's just,
yeah, either me or someone from the staff would be there at that pre-construction conference to
well,
make sure.
same with the town engineering division, not calling for the town engineer to be involved.
Yeah.
You're talking with a representative from that, and I think it would work for the planning board too. And if that representative is you or the town engineer, that would be fine, depending on the size or the complexity of a project.
So what was your comment, Paul, to change it how?
Well,
Make it vague.
it's identifying an individual, town planner should be a representative of the town planning department,
Okay.
because it says the engineering division.
So this is under A, prior to any construction, the developer, their project engineer, and their contractor must schedule a pre-construction meeting with the town planner, Falmouth Engineering Division, board's inspector, and other appropriate town parties. That's where we're at.
It's a minor point. It's identifying an individual in one case,
You're
and the
saying
other is
representative of
identifying.
the planning department,
Yeah.
rather than town
And
planner.
it could be the town planner, it could not be the town planner. And it just seems to be limiting it, that's all.
Well, we've got an awful lot of reference in this paragraph to the planning department.
Yeah. Right.
Jim?
Yeah, what kind of impact does this have both in time and cost to a development? Is this gonna, we're increasing a lot of inspections.
Presently, as I understand it from our engineering division, with the inspection protocol you have to put stuff down, and then they have to rip it out for the inspections, and then they have to put it back down. So the fact that, and this is a case on Cypress Avenue where they had mains in and things like that, where essentially they're doing the work twice. This is sort of that step-by-step standard. In our subdivision stuff, I mean, let's see, when did we create this inspection protocol? It's probably 20 or 30 years old. So these are those inspections, and they're essentially what is done in lots of other towns to make sure that you've got a step-by-step process that's sequential.
Okay, I asked the question, what do they do impact on time? Does it increase the time more? And cost, that was the question I was asking.
So the cost of the inspections or the cost of the work that the contractor has to do, it's certainly going to minimize the cost the inspector has to do, because they have to do some things twice. Under the current protocol, it requires 24 hours for an inspection. Under this one, it requires 48 hours for an inspection. And if you're building a project and you're the contractor, you've got to line these folks up, and you should have a pretty good idea about when you're going to get those work done and when those people are going to be on the site.
So does it make it more expensive or less expensive?
I don't know if it makes it either.
Either, okay. I just wanted to understand what we're doing here. Looks like a lot of inspections, that's all.
I think what it does is it breaks out what they're looking at.
Right.
Because you can, although I wonder, would it be worthwhile or unnecessary to say that some inspections can be done simultaneously? I don't know whether you need that, but the statement that some can, and I'm not versed enough to figure out which ones they might be.
So the contractor's gonna call for inspections. He can say, look, I'm working on the road, I've got water line I'm putting in, I've got drainage I'm putting, I've got gas lines I'm putting in. That's an open trench, and those inspections could all happen at the same time. So it's up to the contractor, and they do these things on a pretty regular basis to know how they're batching those.
And that information about batching them
Right.
would come out in the pre-conference that you're having. So they'd be aware that that's a possibility.
Yeah, so if their schedule is they're gonna have these 4 trades on the site at that same time, then you do all those together. But it's up to them on how they're running their show and how their subs are showing up.
Bob just
Yeah,
very quietly said, and I told him to speak up.
You know, it's typical. I do all my rough-ins, have rough plumbing, electrical, any of that stuff, and call the inspector once and have them all come out same day or within a day or two of each other. So it's pretty common.
This is just simply spelling it out. You have to do these
Yeah, I think
inspections.
spelling it out's a good idea,
I do too.
obviously.
Paul?
I think it actually can reduce costs and increase efficiency by having everybody on board right at the beginning. You know where you are, what you have to do, and I think it can actually reduce costs.
We don't currently have a requirement for a pre-construction conference. We did at
Right.
Cape Estates because I thought it was a good idea, and I asked the developer to meet me out there, and they did. And that worked like a charm up until the point they decided to pave something when they didn't have permission to. But up until that point, worked swimmingly well.
So, yes, John.
Just a question here. It says at the end that we can see Forms D, E, and F, but I only see Form D in the packet. I don't know what E and F comprise of. It may not even be important at all, I'm just curious.
Here's the motion for it.
I do not have Form D, E, and
I know,
F.
I know.
Well, obviously I have Form D with me
D,
here,
yeah.
but I don't have E and F with me.
Is it, are those two forms that we should be voting, or are those extraneous forms that were mentioned wherever you grabbed this from?
At this point, I really don't have a definitive answer for you to tell you what Form E and Form F is, so I
Okay,
apologize for those.
so then it looks like we should be crossing out E and F, since we don't know what they are.
I just did.
And Paul, you would like to see representatives of town planner,
Representative of the planning
Pardon?
office.
Planning department.
okay, representatives of the planning department.
It could be a town planner, it could be someone else,
Okay.
depending on the project.
And the town planner who assigns work.
Mhm.
May I ask another question also?
Yes, John.
Where it says all work, the last sentence, all work, last paragraph, done under this article shall be done under the supervision of and certification by the applicant's design engineer. And then it says, see the forms, and then at the end it says, security shall not be released by the planning board until receipt of interim reports and Form D executed by the planning board's engineer. Now, is the planning board's engineer the town engineering department? Or are you, are we gonna be asking these applicants to hire their own engineer, or an outside engineer, is a better way of saying it?
So at this
Because
point.
we've had that discussion in the past.
So at this point, it is whomever that engineer is, whether the town is going to be using the engineering division, which we'll talk about in just a moment, or whether the town is going to be using a 53G consultant. So the board's engineer, obviously the applicant's design engineer is someone, let's use names just to make it easier, like somebody like Mike McGrath. He's the applicant's design engineer. And they're gonna be working with the planning board's engineer, who may be the DPW, or it may be a 53G consultant, depending upon where we go with the next discussion that we're gonna have about 53G engineers. But, so their engineer is gonna talk to our engineer, whether it's our contracted engineer or whether it's a DPW employee.
Okay.
So my understanding of the reason that you'd like to see the vote tonight is because we've got all of these 40Bs coming in, and the ZBA would love some guidance.
Well, and this has been languishing for a while, and I would love to got it back to you prior to, but everyone loves a deadline, and when Noreen told me that they're voting Crooked Meadow on the 13th of February, and it'd be great if we had a policy in place that we could give them, other than this four-step process that we've heard is not really operative and not all that helpful.
Paul?
This says, Form D executed by whomever.
Yep.
I suggested we add a line down the bottom on who's gonna sign it and execute it.
So this is the, on the Form D, this is that checklist, and it's the Form D, it has the project engineer, the developer, and the project engineer at the top.
Yeah, but it should be executed, which would apply a signature of somebody down the bottom.
I see, you want to add
Signatures.
signature.
All right, so we got initials for both the project engineer and the town's inspector in the right column, but you'd like to see a signature block at the, somewhere on this.
Who's executing it on behalf of the town or the planning department? Probably should say execute on behalf of the planning department, and then whatever his name is, and a date.
Yeah, that sounds good, Paul.
I have a couple more questions,
Yeah.
if I may. So, looking at the two forms, they're really very, very similar. The form that we're looking at in blue tonight just spells it out a little bit clearer, but I think that what we've been working under has been very adequate as long as people get their inspections. And Tom is saying that this will help with the 40Bs. It may or may not, because every 40B developer can ask for relief from these requirements. Any, not all, but any that they feel could be a detriment to making their development profitable or doable. So just because we make this part of our bylaw, doesn't mean that the 40B developer is going to have to abide by these. And my only real concern that I see in here is this 48-hour notice. And I think Mike McGrath gave a really good example of it, that when they paved the road, Cape Club,
Yeah.
they had the dense grade down. And this is what he said. I'm not saying this is how it happened, but this is what he said. The dense grade was down, and they had to pave it because torrential rains were coming the next day, which would saturate the dense grade and force them to redo it. So to save many thousands of dollars, he, as an engineer, okayed the base, the gravel, compaction, and they paved it. And historically in this town, that has been adequate. That if an engineer signs off on a road, then the engineer owns the road and the town would accept that. So I'm only saying, we live in a part of the country where it's difficult to predict the weather. So to ask somebody to put the dense grade down, and, you know, imagine a 3,000-foot road with dense grade down, and they have to wait 2 days for somebody to come and inspect it and say, okay, now you can put pavement on it, but in the meantime,
Washed away.
Well, they have to
I would
request,
just like-
they have to request the inspection 48 hours in advance. So if you're the guy doing that dense grade, all right, I'm doing this thing on Tuesday, I'm making my request for an inspection on Monday, so by the time I get done with things on Wednesday, they're on the site. So we can look at making that, call it 24 hours versus 48 hours. Because right now we do inspections based on 24 hours call, but it's gotta be in writing. When people just call in the morning and say, can you get out here, it has to be in writing. And
Actually, John's observation is an argument in favor of 53G, because if you're calling your own engineer, they're more apt to come speedily than the town engineer who's got a full schedule.
well, it won't be your own engineer. It'll be the town's engineer that you're paying for.
Might be your own, because the next one is about contracting it out. Or have I misunderstood
John, your
that?
argument is that this first page is what we're currently operating under, which is a lot looser in its language.
But they say the same thing.
They say the same thing.
They have the same requirements.
so you'd like the responsibility of the developer to request their writing at least 24 hours in advance, as we currently do today.
Much better.
Yeah, I think so. as
And I
well.
just have one, I really have one question here, because we talked about the dense grade being put down. And the question we had at the Cape Club was not that the dense grade was put down or not, it was the compaction. And nowhere have I ever, I've put in probably 12 roads in this town, no one has ever asked for a compaction test. And, I mean, if you use a company like Lawrence Lynch, they have lasers on their rollers, they do all the compaction tests while they're rolling it, but no one has ever come to my site and said, what's the compact? They come and make sure you put 10 inches or 12 inches of dense grade. They measure that, the town engineers I'm talking about. But no one has ever said, what's the compaction? And so I don't see that in here either.
No, I don't see it either.
But I wouldn't want to see it fail because somebody put pavement on it and it didn't have a compaction test, if that's what the town's looking for.
So inspection number 4 will be, inspection will include the final subgrade plane. Inspection number 5 to include the gravel base plane. Now, as I understand the requirements from engineering, and if there's an engineer at the board, he can correct me, but you've got to have the ground sufficiently compacted in order to support the weight of that. If it's a building,
Before the dense grade goes down.
if it's a building, it has a much tighter requirement for compaction, because you don't want things to settle if you're putting a building in. So I think it's the same thing when you're putting down that road. You're obviously tamping it, you're making sure it's tamped properly, and that gets back to.
I understand that, but that was the question at the Cape Club. Was the dense grade compacted properly? That's why they did nuclear testing out there. Yet I've never seen that I've never seen anybody check that from the town or my own engineers. So if it's gonna be a requirement, it should be part of one of these sentences. That there's a compaction test or something that.
Well, this is exactly the list that
Right.
our DPW and I put together. They were the ones who said, I say, why don't you find what you like and bring it to me, and I'll bring it to the board.
Right, but you understand my question.
Mm-hmm.
John, my recollection on that is because somebody from our engineering division went out there and his foot sank in. It was soft. And that's when they called for the compaction test, because it wasn't done as they, the paving was put on. And so I don't know that it's a standard requirement as a compaction test, so.
And I'm not gonna disagree with that, and I don't
Right.
wanna get too far in the
No.
weeds here. But again, we had a registered engineer that approved the dense grade, and then we've had testimony from that engineer. We also had testimony from the town's engineer at a different time, that the reason you put a base coat down of pavement is so that during construction, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, you find out where the soft spots are or bad spots. You repair them, and then you put the top coat on. So I don't want the developers to get caught in a trap here. If there's a compaction test that the town's gonna require on the dense grade, on the gravel, it should say so. Otherwise,
Well, and I've heard this well-seasoned practice of, we're gonna put the road down and we're gonna drive over, and that'll show up where the errors and omissions are. Well, we don't build roofs that way. We don't build roofs and say, well, we'll build a roof and we see where the leaks are coming through, we'll go up and put some more
and
shingles up
I
there.
don't disagree with that, but our town engineer stood right there at that podium and said that when he was in private practice, that's how they did it.
Right.
So,
So you're asking, John, should we add something in here between?
ask engineering how we're gonna handle that if it ever comes up again. Let's prevent it. Let's prevent the problem before we have a problem. And the other thing I'd like to have clarified is the berms. Typically, a Cape Cod berm on Cape Cod is laid with the final coat of asphalt. You don't put it down between the base coat and the final coat, and you don't put it down on the base coat. Why? Because all the heavy equipment that goes across these roads to dig a hole for a foundation or a septic or any numbers of things would destroy it, and they do destroy the berms. They're just a slope berm. So historically, they go on the same day that the final coat of asphalt goes on. And I would like to have that clarified, please.
So here in inspection number 7 includes the installation of curbing, and inspection number 8 would include the final surface.
Yes, but see, to me, they've always been put together at the same day, the same time. Not do the curbing and then come do the final coat of asphalt.
Well, I think that's one of those batched sort of inspections. The paver's coming out, he's got the form box, we're gonna go out here and we're gonna do the curbing, and we're gonna put the final wearing course down.
I would just like to have a clarification of it, please. Because if I remember correctly, again, the town engineer, when he described it, he felt that the base coat of asphalt should have the Cape Cod berm put on it, and then maybe repaired later on. I just wanted, everyone should be on the same playing field, that's all. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to clarify things here
Consistent throughout.
and be consistent, that's
Yeah,
all. And not that we've got tons of roads going in, who knows? Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but we should
I agree.
prevent any future confusion.
I mean, do we just combine 7 and 8? And
Right.
inspection
Well, that's-
will include the, number 7 will include the installation of curbing and the final surface.
See, to me, historically,
And-
that's how we've always done
Yeah,
it.
and then we're down to 10 inspections as opposed to 11.
Well, several of these are gonna get combined
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah.
They're not gonna come and look at the catch basins without looking at the
Right,
inlets. I
right,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
it's, so, but this is.
But I
this-
think that would prevent any confusion.
I do too, if that's what the town
Yeah.
engineers are
Because if
okay
you have
with.
somebody that says they want the curbs in at one point versus another,
Yeah, if
this,
you-
this would tell people, we want it.
Yeah, if you put it in the beginning, you're gonna be doing it twice.
Right, yeah,
And
yeah.
Just be the installation of curbing and the
So-
final service.
so please, just a clarification of those couple of items.
So, we're obviously not going to get this in time to give any guidance to the ZBA, in the instance that they're looking for. Or though, do you feel like giving them a sort of a preliminary guidance would be helpful to them, Tom?
Well, I have a lot of confidence in the DPW about how they conduct their business. And this is what they brought to us. And John and I have talked a bit about the curbing, when you put the curbing in. And it just comes to mind, we're having this discussion tonight. If you build a road and you don't have any stormwater infrastructure whatsoever to keep that water on the road, where does it go? It just goes off the side of the road and erodes the sides of the road and things like that. So at some point, you've got to have some sort of stopgap measure, it would seem like, to keep the water where it's supposed to be and take the water where it's supposed to go to. So whether you have a temporary sausage berm that some people put down or something like that to maintain the water and keep the water where it's supposed to go, rather than just have it sheet off the roads. You've got a construction site, and, there's people here on this dais who've been on a lot more construction sites than I have, but you certainly don't want to have continual erosion issues and things like that, with things blowing off the road, potentially undermining the road where you put it in. So where the curbing goes in, where it goes at, is a matter of practice and those inspections. So, we can bring this back in a couple of weeks and talk about it again if you like. But this is the inspection protocol that our engineers put together based upon how they've conducted business over the time they've been doing both private practice and government practice. So I'm relying on their expertise in that inspection protocol and the way that it's ordered here.
So what is the will of the board on this? Wait for our next meeting to have Tom get a few answers? Vote it tonight with the few changes that have gone in here. For instead of 48 hours, it'd be 24 hours.
Yeah, we made that change, we got rid of E and F.
And also representatives of, instead of
Correct.
specifically.
Well, I'm not
Still
sure
call-
what,
You could still call it a draft for their input and our reaction, so forth.
We could,
It's
yes.
still a draft if you have to meet the
So,
deadline.
you mean we could vote a draft
Vote a draft
tonight?
and use that for purposes of discussion with them, and they may come back with further changes.
that's a good idea,
Okay,
yeah,
Yeah.
because
So make the motion, Paul.
I make a motion, we prepare a draft.
So a
with-
motion to adopt a
discussed.
draft.
Adopt the draft.
So the motion is in bold letters at the bottom. Motion to adopt
revised
a
draft.
draft
Draft inspection, not revised, a
of the
draft.
revised inspection protocol.
Draft inspection protocol, residential development.
This revised as a draft.
I have one other comment too. Number 3, does the DPW certify the installation? They supervise it, but do they certify it? I
It
don't
says,
think they certify, I think they
well, this is clearly. this-
supervise,
yeah.
they do it themselves usually.
How they certify is you have to do a pressure test after it's installed. That's how they, after the water mains are in, they do a pressure test and chlorinate. Now, I say they, I mean the private contractor does that.
Private contractor does.
But the water department witnesses it.
Well, this says it shall be certified by the water, you mean after the pressure test is?
Yes.
Yeah, and B is also called out below.
And B
that does-
calls it out.
And that does not change, that is our current protocol, that the water main installation will normally be carried out under the supervision of the DPW Water Division.
I think we just
Okay,
Send over
so
draft.
the motion then, Paul, was that you move to adopt a draft, or this as a draft.
Adopt the changes as discussed and submit a draft inspection protocol for review.
Okay,
Got that?
Got that?
do we need a second? Yes,
Dr.
now,
Chen.
please.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Good suggestion,
Uh,
Paul.
Can I ask you a question here, too?
Sure.
Further on, we talk about the section 53G consultants.
Yep.
Have they been identified? How do they be identified? Is there a list that the town uses, or is there a process you gotta begin all over again?
Nope.
There should be a certified list that they can just take
So-
someone from that list.
So, regarding the next item on the agenda is the fee schedule for subdivisions. And in that fee schedule, it talks specifically about 53G as one of those fees. So you have here what our current fee schedule is in 30577, that would allow the use of consulting engineers. We have gone out and did an RFP and identified and accepted 5 engineering firms that have agreed to do this work. Those folks include Green International, the BSC Group, Ty and Bond, Beals and Thomas, and Horsley Witten Group. So
What are the last two?
Beals and Thomas and the Horsley Witten Group. The Horsley Witten Group recently emailed back and said, I don't know that we were capable of doing this work, so they may be withdrawing their application. I've been playing phone tag with the principal of the firm for a couple days. But we have 4 firms that are full-on, ready to go: Green Engineering, Green International, BSC, Ty and Bond, and Beals and Thomas. These are all full-service engineering firms that do stormwater, wetlands, road transportation. We're not gonna have a circumstance with any of these folks where somebody has to 1099 a consultant to do traffic review or something like that.
Surprised you don't have local firms on there like BSS and, did
Well,
you say BSS?
Well, I did not. So,
BSS and Cape and Island.
so we sent this out as an RFP that anyone could reply to. Lots of times, if you are an engineer that's doing, if you're someone who does work in town and you're reviewing work in town, you become this special municipal employee that allows you to act in both capacities. And I would venture to say some of the local firms might have just decided we'd much rather do projects than do reviews.
Good point.
So we put out an RFP for the world to see. We followed all the procedures and requirements. We got actually 7, maybe 8 applicants, 3 of which didn't make the cut because their qualifications weren't sufficient enough to be in those. So 4 firms. Interesting enough, we are meeting with all 4 of these firms tomorrow in order to introduce them to the Conservation Commission and the Board of Health and the ZBA and all the folks that they'll be doing reviews for. Because every board and every committee so far is either has something in place in their requirements and have been waiting for engineers to use. So if we're gonna do business with these folks, I think it's important for them to understand who they're working with, who they're working for, what our in-house requirements are and practices and things that are. So this is our first hi, how are you kickoff meeting for the 53G engineers who will be working in every department so far, but one, that I hope to talk about in a minute.
Okay, so, you know, guys, it's going after 9. We still got a lot of stuff to do here. We've got
Make a
50
motion, we adjourn.
I'm for that.
I'm not happy to talk about this.
So within the,
Till 10 last night, so I'm ready to go home now.
So within the fee schedule, there are 2 letters. One is from Peter McConerty that says, if I may, 53G review consultants and subdivision inspections. Dear Mr. Bott, Public Work recommends the use of 53G consultants for reviewing proposed plans / document packages submitted to town departments, boards, and commissions. We also recommend having review consultants perform said submissions, site inspections during construction. In the past, in-house review, design review, and accompanying inspections have added considerable workload to the Public Works Engineering Division and has diminished our obligatory responsibilities of designing, constructing, and performing required materials inspections of town infrastructure. We request the support of the planning board of this much-needed initiative. Peter McCartney, P.E., land surveyor, interim director of public works. The second letter has a very similar content to it from Jim McLaughlin, the town engineer, RE 53G Consultants. Dear Mr. Bott, the engineering division is in favor of the use of 53G consultants. We currently spend in excess of a full-time equivalent of a staff engineer in review of plans submitted to boards and commissions for the town of Falmouth. Use of staff resources to review projects prevents us from fulfilling our mission of providing engineering support for town projects. Use of 53G consultants is a common practice in communities throughout the Commonwealth, and we would encourage its use within the town, in the town of Falmouth. So I had asked Ray Jack because he had offered the support as well, and when I emailed him in December to ask him if he could also supply a letter from me, he did not get back to me because he was sort of had his sights, I think, on other things at that point.
He's gone.
So our engineering division has said, we're busy, this takes an inordinate amount of time, it's essentially a full-time equivalent. And to my previously made case, using our engineering division to inspect private development is essentially the taxpayers underwriting the cost of private development. And I've heard the argument from other people who said, these people who are developers here, well, they're taxpayers as well. Well, they may be, but the common practice is to utilize these outside folks, whether you have an engineering division or not. And it's back to the board, how you want to handle that, but it's a fairly common practice. The $4,000 that they are going to basically put down as a retainer will allow the engineer to come on board right away. So a set of plans comes in, we send those plans to the engineer that's been selected by the planning staff or the conservation staff, whoever that person is. They'll be able to immediately get on the review of those sort of things and have a first report back to the town by the time the hearing opens, usually within 30 days. If we have this process where, well, we're gonna get somebody and we're gonna look that we need that, and we have to do an RFP to find out what things are gonna cost, that's just gonna take more time and effort for the engineer, and time is money. So this is a fairly well-honed experience in most places where they give us we get the plans, we send the plans to the engineer looks at them, goes, yeah, I can do this for, $3,200. In Kingston, it was $2,500, and just about every time I got a review for something, it was over $2,500, so we have to go back to the developer and say, I need another $647, because I can't actually oblige a contract with somebody to work if it's not funded. So the funding amount of $4,000 ensures that there's no lapse between the time that someone submits something and gets it done. Those monies are placed in an interest-bearing account, and any money that's left over at the end of the day is returned to the applicant with interest, although we don't pay great interest. I have seen these things go for a few months, and I have seen engineering reviews get up to $11,000 for a very large country club subdivision in Kingston with a recalcitrant developer. But I've never seen one go to $16,000. I've never seen one go to anything outside that norm. That's my pitch. It makes a lot of sense. It's what we do in most places in the Commonwealth, and we're the outlier here. And I think it makes perfect sense, particularly when you look at the needs of the DPW folks. I trust the people I work with, and they tell me this stuff is killing us and it's taken a lot of time, and we really need to either hire another person to do this kind of work so we can do our other stuff, or outsource it to the folks who we've selected to this. That's what makes sense to me.
I would rather see it outsourced. I'm just gonna speak to that right now. But I wonder, the retainer for project review, do 40Bs have to pay that? Because they're gonna need it.
In the event that, yes, you can request anything you want for a 40B. If the applicant says it renders my project uneconomic, then there has to be some proof that it renders their project uneconomic. But the cost of review and the cost of inspections are standard business practices for any developer.
So they can complain, but Because right now, I would assume our engineering department has to inspect them as they're being built.
Correct. And under 53G, the applicant has the ability to question the qualifications of the engineer. But they don't have the ability to say, we don't want to pay that price. The law specifically states that qualified engineer retained by the town has the right to do this work. The town has a right to ask for that money and follow this process.
Okay.
They don't get to complain about the fee, and if they say it renders my project uneconomic, well, that'd be interesting to know how that is. One of the very interesting things we had about the other day when we went to HAC, and thank you all for coming, if I didn't mention it last night, there were a number of the planning board members there at Housing Appeals Committee, Housing Assistance Corporation, about form-based code. And they said, well, what are some of the other sessions you'd like to see us do? And one of those was about finances. We would love to get a better look at what those finances are, and they were taken specifically from their perspective as affordable housing developers. But I think that's one of the things that most of the folks on this side of the dais don't have a real good command of are the developers' finances. So I thought that would be a great thing, and I advocated strongly for that as a session in the future for the Housing Appeals Committee to do. But if $4,000 is gonna sink your project, those are very, very thin margins, and I realize there's a lot of people who work on very, very thin margins.
Charlotte?
My objection to this, the first time it came up, is this the third time? I think it is
Yeah, I
about the
think it
third
is.
time. Is, it's privatizing, it's just sending work out, and I wanted to know what the impact was going to be on the engineering department. So now they've answered that, and they're apparently not concerned about some of their work being privatized. It came, the first time we saw it was at the time of the Boeing mess, where they had sort of embedded their regulators. And this is kind of an example of that also. So that kind of colored the way I was looking at it. But I think I was the only one who objected on that grounds.
Anybody else?
I'm not in support of this at all.
That's fine.
Would you say why?
Well, I can just see it extending projects. I can see it becoming an unknown expense. And maybe small projects, it won't be as big of a deal, but we can have larger scale projects here. Say, like Liberty Green, if that were to be built under these conditions, a 40B, but imagine what the expense would be to have a private engineer oversee that project. The town is saying that any town projects they'll engineer and take care of. But any private development, they want to have an outside source. And I think of, like this evening, we had 2 applicants here for accessory apartments. They would fall under this, right? They would have to,
No, because we don't do site plan review for 1 and 2 family residences.
well, we got some pretty extensive comments here from the engineering department.
So the way referrals will happen, and the way referrals always happen, is that we will send out the project to the various departments, and they make their comments. In the case of engineering, they would point out, these are 3 things that concern us. So engineering would essentially be pointing the finger to that consulting engineer to say, look at those sort of things. So where we have a single-family residence, and I've said this before, we have no business doing site plan review on 1 and 2 family dwellings. But we do under the accessory housing bylaw. So in this case, it wouldn't be a commercial development, it wouldn't be a site plan, it wouldn't be a subdivision. This is essentially for commercial projects or larger scale developments, not for single-family 1 and 2 family dwellings.
Does it say that in here? I didn't see that.
It says it in our bylaw that site plan review is for over 1,000 square foot of development. There's nothing in our bylaw other than in the accessory housing bylaw that says we do site plan review on 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings. They're exempt under law from these sort of things. So
I have real concerns that our building process, we were trying to make the permitting and everything be more streamlined, and I think we're not doing it. I think we're making it a lot more complicated, and I hear tremendous feedback from people in the trades that Falmouth has gotten a lot harder to deal with and not easier to deal with. And that's just a concern I have. And this certainly looks like it's just an awful lot more details and inspections and process and overwhelming them. So I'm not in favor of it either. But
So we're throwing another wrinkle in, is what you're saying, that makes
it's
it
pretty
more
hard.
complex.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, you're down to 4 votes.
Okay.
we had set out as a goal to streamline the process, because we had always heard how tough Falmouth was. And people are telling me Falmouth's a lot tougher now than it used to be.
Okay.
Now, maybe it should be that way, you can make that argument, but just giving some feedback that I hear quite a bit.
I haven't heard from either of you.
No, I tend to agree. We did talk about streamlining things, and
Okay.
we tend to be adding more.
Pam? I agree. It's dead.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, that we voted to, if someone does a commercial project, they have to have an engineer that signs off
We
on
did
it.
do that,
At the
yes.
end.
And we really haven't even given that a try yet. I mean,
Okay,
um,
so 53G is dead tonight.
for me it is.
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's dead, so the majority is no. I don't even know how you're feeling, Paul.
Well, I think a lot of unknowns the way it is. I mean, just selection to do it and the process might delay everything a little bit further.
Okay.
I think we need to think about it a little bit more, so I would not want to do it right now.
So we're not gonna get a majority vote, so
No.
it's dead tonight. Okay? Amendments to the HPP. And this came up partially, I think, maybe mostly, because of the 511 Brick Kiln Road, 40B. And in the HPP, it says that Brick Kiln Road would be a good place to put 40B developments. But we weren't anticipating it would be right above our water supply, and I do
Gonna
have.
fix your tag.
Oh, thank you. I do have a letter here from Virginia Valley Ayla that is, I think it's in your packets, but I would like to read it. It says, it's dated February 11th. Good morning, Tom and members of the planning board. I have recently become aware of the proposed 40B project for 32 homes at 511 Brick Kiln Road. The planning board will be discussing its recommendations on this project at your meeting this evening. I unfortunately have a prior meeting commitment and cannot attend. By this email, I am registering my concerns about this project. It is very dense housing located directly upstream of the major intake pathway for groundwater to Long Pond, Falmouth's major water source. It is located in a water resource protection area and should be held to a higher standard for wastewater disposal, a cluster system with denitrifying capabilities. It has been mentioned that the project could be connected to the sewer via the high school. I think such a connection is complicated to permit, DEP may not approve, and technically to achieve. I also think such a connection sets a bad precedent. Developer creates an environmental problem and town has to use its sewer capacity to solve it. Sewer capacity is a valuable town asset and should be reserved for the targeted areas of development downtown. Please share this email with all board members. Thank you, Virginia Valley Ayla, Precinct 5 Town Meeting Member. As you know, she's more than that. She's on the wastewater committee as well and has been concerned with this for many, many years. Tom wrote a letter to DHCD after our last meeting expressing our concern about this project being located above
Right.
Long Pond and sent that off. It generated some, I believe, discussion at the Board of Selectmen too, about how we make these decisions. Well, one of the things that probably should be done is that the HPP should be amended to take this area of Brick Kiln Road out of consideration. Okay, most of it is in protection. That little piece just doesn't happen to be. But the HPP also says, that makes it more important to do this as well, I think, that maybe town lands should be considered at some point for affordable housing developments. It doesn't say, not impinging on our water resource.
Mm-hmm.
And so that protected land that currently is in that area of Brick Hill Road could become unprotected. Some of it is owned by the 300 Committee, some of it is owned by the town. So Tom looked, and I did too, at the HPP, went over it, and it appears that maybe these are places that something needs to be done. I don't know if you want to do any further discussion tonight or contemplate how the HPP perhaps should be changed. And Tom, would you like to, obviously want to say something?
Well, I have the housing production plan. I printed copies for you folks, but I couldn't find the copy I meant for myself. So there are a couple of things in the HPP, and I want to talk a little bit about 511 Brick Hill as well. So in the HPP, it says conduct additional research and planning. So this is, the suggestion was made to prepare a land use map that identifies area where growth, including affordable housing, should be encouraged to help future participants. Participants in the forum identified these areas, and it included along Brick Hill Road, as you see right here. This work builds on the current planning work in Davis Straits. So next steps, the town planners work with the planning board and board of selectmen to address this future growth map. So what we have been doing to that effect is we have looked at the areas that the Cape Cod Commission has identified as appropriate for development in the community activity centers. The second thing that the Cape Cod Commission, the regional planning policy, talks about are development, suburban development areas. And this is not something that they mapped, but they described them. So we are actually in the process of mapping them. I had Bob Shea do large-scale aerial photography for me, so we could identify these areas specific for redevelopment as suburban development areas. So we'll have a map that shows where things should go. And those are going to be those areas around town, those areas that are being redeveloped and things like that, but not necessarily on 151 and out in the hinterlands and things like that. So that is one of the things that's in the HPP to develop this, this map. So also, and I think 814, so this is page 114, let's go down to page 132. If I had a Kindle, I'd be much better at this, but I read books. Old school, 132, thank you. So in 132, pursue partnerships with developers, current status work cooperatively with, so recommendations. Recommendations of July 12th, 2018 Community Housing Program identified the following locations as potential housing development: Davis Straits area, town-owned property, over neighborhoods, Falmouth Mall Plaza, and administration building, and here we have along Brick Hill Road. So those are the two places I found that specifically references Brick Hill Road in the HPP as to whether, and the question that kind of came up was, well, what did they mean by Brick Hill Road? Did they mean Brick Hill Road down towards town? Did they mean Brick Hill Road to the east of Gifford? Did they mean the entire length of Brick Hill Road? And it's not very clear as to what that is. So in the discussions we had last night with the Board of Selectmen on is 511 Brick Kiln going to cause an impact on the water supply? So in working with our water superintendent, Steve Rafferty, we went and looked at a couple of these issues here. So from the perspective of what's happening in 511 Brick Kiln, this shows where 511 Brick Kiln is, outlined in the yellow here, and this shows the area of the Zone 2. So in the next slide, we see now here's 511 Brick Kiln, once again outlined in the yellow. Here's the Zone 2 in the Water Resource District. And then slide number 3, we see Brick Kiln here with the Zone 2, the Water Resource Districts, and the coastal ponds. And so we know in the coastal ponds that concern is nitrogen in those, and phosphorus and fertilizers. So we require a nitrogen mitigation septic systems in those developments, if they're not a 40B, obviously. They're built under the conventional developments. So what I was, and I know that coastal pond overlay districts are a creation of zoning. When mapping was done to identify the soils that are appropriate for water to infiltrate into the ground, that's why the lines of these things tend to be these sort of curvilinear lines and not, you know, your standard polygons and grids that you might see for a parcel when our zoning area changes. But a zone 2 that we see up here is specific to protect a well, and there's no zone 2 for surface water. There's no zone 2 for Long Pond. That is covered in DEP's drinking water requirements as a zone A, a zone B, or a zone C, which aren't shown on our maps. So Steve Rafferty, as part of the development of Locust Field 40B, had done this initial analysis. So this is a map left over from Locust Field that he sent to me, and so I highlighted 511 Brick Kiln on it. So his contention is in what the 310 CMR 22220, tried to memorize it, said is that the concern about impact to the water supply is in the area of Zone A in an aquifer protection area. So this down here at the bottom, you see this Zone A, and Zone A is defined by the high part of the bank where water hits the bank and rolls into the pond, and then 400 feet beyond that. So here is the area of Zone A that goes to this line to the pond. So Steve is saying if it's in Zone A, no mas, we can't have any of that. But if it's in Zone B outside of this area, what is required is anything that complies with Title V. So we have a requirement for a nitrogen septic systems in the coastal ponds, but this is not a coastal pond, it's an area of water resource district. So this is why I talk to the people who do this thing, so I understand better, because we didn't have the mapping there. So in our letter to Mass Housing, it said the planning board is concerned that the location of the development within a water resource protection district and in proximity to Long Pond water, surface water supply could be impacted by the development. And secondly, we noted that the board does not feel as though this is an appropriate location without tying into the sewer system or installing an innovative alternative septic systems capable of treating phosphorus and nitrosus to acceptable levels identified by Cape Cod to protect the water main water supply for the town of Falmouth. So those were our concerns, and that's why we wrote the letter. So now I'm hearing from our water guy who goes, well, that's not an issue because it's not in the Zone A, and we have a treatment plant that is very robust and treats, about 6 different steps of things, including a DAC, deactivated carbon filters, and this ozone stuff that basically treats most of those things, and including contaminants of emerging concern, which is sort of code for stuff we don't quite know about, pharmaceuticals and things like that. So the guy who's running our water system says, I'm not too concerned about this particular 40B because of its proximity and because of the fact that we own much of the land around it. So we look at what the rest of the Brick Kiln corridor is. This is 511 Brick Kiln here in the orange. This is the Lutheran Church, which is the Y site next door. And everything to the north and everything to the south is essentially owned by the town or the 300 committee, and we require the town to sort of decide they want to amend those. So to Pat's point, if it says in there, we should look at town properties as well. Well, that's a process that identifies in the HPP. Well, we should have a process to look at what those effective parcels are that are appropriate for development. So to what extent the board wants to go into amending the HPP to remove the language from Brick Kiln or those sort of things, we certainly can move forward with that. In the case of 511 Brick Kiln, I'm hearing from our water superintendent, he's not thinking this is going to have an impact. But if we want to look at amending the HPP, and that's where we want to go, we'll have to sort of sort out what that process is, because it was approved by the planning board and approved by the Board of Selectmen and approved by DHCD. If the board wants to pursue that, I'll start with DHCD to ask the first question, how do we go about amending the HPP? and then you take those steps. But I just want to make clear that those were our concerns addressed in the letter that I put together and ran by Chairman Kerfoot to make sure we're on solid ground. But it doesn't appear to be an issue in this site. It might be if we didn't own everything else or we didn't have a robust treatment protocol. But from the perspective of our water superintendent, I've looked at this in detail from the Locust Field location. Same information applies to development on Brick Kiln. The map shows the approximate location of Zone A and all the lands within it the town owns. Map shows the approximate location of the Zone B boundaries within the zone site. All septic must comply with Title V. So,
So why do we set up a water protection district? We don't need it.
Yes, we do.
Oh, you just said we don't.
Well, I will tell you why, okay? As you know, Jim, my husband spent his whole professional career doing this. And at one time, about 30 years ago, he could not find his original report. But he did a magnetic study. I can't remember what it is exactly now. And he found the plume from the high school, traced it all the way down to Long Pond. And there was eutrophication right along the shoreline where exactly it should come out. And what happens is that when you pump Long Pond as it is being pumped, it speeds up the flowage considerably of the groundwater. Think about sucking on a straw. You just have a straw in a glass. You're not doing anything, but when you're sucking on it, up it goes. And this is essentially what's going on when you're pumping Long Pond for our drinking water supply. And yes, we may very well have a plant that can take everything out of it, but I would venture a guess that if you're taking more and more out of it because you're sucking more and more in of the contaminants, it's gonna be more expensive to operate it. I'm not gonna argue that point at all. And there was a USGS study also in 2004 that extrapolated out to 2020. I'm not a technical person, I can't give you any of this information, but Bill is going to sit down with Steve Rafferty and go over these things, because he also knows the laws too, but in this instance,
I don't know anything about it, except when we did our local comprehensive plan, we looked at the
Right.
water protection areas and said, we don't want to build there.
exactly.
And that was in our local comprehensive plan, and somehow there's a disconnect between the housing.
Mhm.
I mean, if you simply added, but not in a water protection district, then the rest of Brick Hill Road would be fine.
Sure,
You don't have, we could go through all these studies to justify it.
Sure.
Or you could just put the phrase,
but not in a water
but not in
protection
a water
zone.
protection district. So,
Absolutely.
couple different ways to skin it, but I think the decision's already been made. The selectmen, it's done.
It is
The
done.
letter's been sent and it's over.
Well, their letter has been sent, but Tom put ours in also.
yeah, they both gone
To
in.
the fray.
Right,
Pardon?
and put
They're
in
both-
our
yeah, they're both-
objection.
Yeah,
Put our objection
We've
in.
already
But
registered it.
but I've also seen emails saying, well, housing's more important, we're gonna do it anyway. That's the feeling I'm getting from watching the selectmen. That's what I was, we'll see what happens. I'm just.
I would
I'm
rather,
gonna just bring it up.
I would rather see what happens, but I would also rather, I think, at this point, be able to amend the housing production plan to, insofar as possible, protect all of that land that can protect Long Pond.
See, this just brings up something that I've been harping about for years, about redoing transfer of development rights.
Mm-hmm.
We really need to do something so that, if somebody has a piece of land out there
Mm-hmm.
where we don't want them building, maybe we could find another place
Mm-hmm.
where they could. I mean, look at all the town land out there that
Yeah.
possibly could be built on.
But in the meantime, amending it as Jim suggests might be what to do.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, I agree
Paul?
with what he
Yeah.
said.
Paul?
I'm curious, the lot right next to it is being proposed for a YMCA, which has tremendous water usage.
Right.
And I don't know where that's going. That's also in the same area. But
Absolutely.
they're going to have pools and all kinds of things and discharges, and I don't know what's gonna happen there. I think that has to be looked at as well.
Well, then you've got an even more concentrated area that is going to be putting whatever they're putting into the ground that will go merrily along towards Long Pond.
Well, you're saying that the Board of Selectmen in favor of this development, I imagine they're also in favor of the Y. And that's a much bigger project that has more impact on the town positively.
And there's another one too that's in the Water Resource Protection District that they're in favor of. I forget the address of it, but there's 3 of them that came up. We looked at all 3 a week ago, and 2 of them were in the Water Resource Protection. And the only one that wasn't was Rebecca Ann that's out.
But the other one, both Julian Suso and the town planner wrote a letter
Right.
saying we don't support it at all. The town doesn't want that
Right.
to happen.
Okay.
Well, that was the one up in
On
North Falmouth.
28A up in West Falmouth, right. Vernal Pools, the works.
No, but there's one I saw too that's off of Sandwich Road, Percival Road, and it's inside the same Water Resource Protection District. And they're in favor of that one.
No.
No, Percival Road is outside.
out?
Yes, it is.
Well, first off, if I may, no one has said anything about Percival Road, other than we have an application that's arrived for a request for a project, site approval letter. So as soon as that came in on February 6th, we have until March 6th to return our comments to DHCD or Mass Housing, as the case may be. So as soon as that came in, I had Melinda send out the whole package to you, unadulterated, unmitigated, didn't take the fine minutia out, and give you the whole package, and then when we had the plans, we sent it to them, so those would be in the board's inboxes. So we're anticipating talking about those on the 25th of February. So the only thing that's been said about Percival Road publicly is me last night at the planning board, at the selectmen's meeting, saying, yes, sometimes we see these things well in advance, like you did with Brick Kiln Road. We've been talking with the developer for a while. But in the case of Percival Road, and what is it called? Do you remember what it's, what the name of it is? It's behind the Cape Verdean Club. We've never seen that before, dropped it out of the sky. And under the rules of engagement, we got 30 days to turn it around. So it's very difficult to get something turned around within 30 days if it goes between 2 elected bodies. So we got the information out as soon as possible so people can look at those things and put their comments together. We, the town departments, meet on this thing on the 19th, so I always prefer to have the board's comments be informed by the comments of the town departments, the technical folks who look at these things. So we're not out there just flailing and necessarily, we're relying on the counsel of the people who we pay to look at these things, whether it's highway, DPW, water superintendent, to give us some comments. We're trying to move the ball on these sort of things.
What would you like to do
Jim,
with
your
this?
comment along Brick Kiln Road, outside of
As long
Water
as it's
Resource
not in
District.
a Water Resource Protection District, that leaves.
Outside, that's how you wanted to say it, right?
Yeah.
Outside.
Because they're saying, because we said Brick Hill Road, my question was, is our local comprehensive plan doesn't, says we shouldn't be, we wanted to protect these areas, and what we were trying to protect is the Water Resource Protection District.
Right.
That was the area the plan said where we shouldn't build, and we should build more towards the convenience
Right.
centers of town. We keep putting these things out here, we'll have a new little center of town out here. Village, we'll create a whole new village. That's exactly what we didn't want to have happen.
So, Tom, this is how we would like to see the HPP amended, to protect anything above our
So
drinking
these
waters.
are the ideas that I'll have to draft, but I don't think we get to decide without any public notice that.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
we can't,
Right.
because,
So that's the board's concern, that we don't want to be encouraging development within water resource districts. So we will, like I said, start the process to determine how you actually have to go about amending that. And then we'll bring it up, and we'll bring, invite
It
people.
might not technically be an amendment, it's just bringing to the surface within this document things that have been said somewhere else, just a reminder. It's not a change.
No, I think we're amending the housing production plan.
because it was voted by us and by the selectmen.
So like I said, what I'll do,
Is left out?
I don't know.
I doubt it.
pardon?
There could be other places in it where things that the LCP asked not to do, and yet they appear here. We haven't gone through it with that perspective.
Nor have I.
No. So there could be others.
There could be.
But it's like, like an overlay plan. This is an overlay plan, and it picked up the stuff from the LCP, and it should have been considered, but it wasn't. So it's just bringing it to the surface.
So if there are other things in the plan that we need to look at, we certainly can. It's 202 pages, and it's on our website. I can I think we might have printed you all copies of it previously. If you'd like me to print you.
I wasn't trying to create more work
No,
for
no,
you.
no, I'm just trying to be inclusive of the fact that if there's other things in here, I mean, I'll go take a look at them and try to drill down as I did with this. I essentially use a, word search function in the original Word document and then find them in the PDF and point out those sort of things.
So anyway, we're starting the process here on this, and it's 20 minutes of 10, and it's committee report time.
I'd like to move to table committee reports till next meeting.
Second.
It's fine with me, all in favor?
Aye.
Any announcements? Good.
One?
Oh, where? Oh, you, okay, I wasn't looking to you, I was looking to the board.
So February 7th was the response date for the folks who wanted to investigate working with the town of Falmouth on form-based code. We sent out 4 proposals to people who are very good at this stuff. 2 of them were referenced at our form-based code training we went to at HAC yesterday. And 2 of those firms both replied to our request for proposals. So we've identified the most qualified, lowest bidder. I spoke with them today that said, essentially, you have the gig, but we still have to do some paperwork. We have to do contracts. We have to do reference checks and things like that. And the second thing I asked them is, will you be available for a kickoff meeting on March 3rd when we're doing our community forum on form-based code? And they said, I'm fairly certain we will. We'll check with our other partners to make sure. So as probably by the end of the week, we'll have a fully identified form-based code consultant on board and ready to come on March 3rd to participate in our forum.
And they are?
As soon as that paperwork is done, I can tell you who they are.
Can't say
But you
yet.
Do
won't,
they draw pretty pictures?
you won't,
Have you
you,
seen some of their work?
you won't be unhappy.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, there's been a motion to adjourn.
I just wanted to say, I thought that was unbelievable. what we-
It
when-
was.
Yeah.
I
It was
was
really good.
thinking maybe I was gonna be wasting my time, but it took me to a whole nother level.
Excellent.
You know, it really was great.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting us there. That was,
Well,
Yeah.
George Proakis is one of my
amazing.
heroes.
Yeah.
Isn't he a great guy? He's one of my planner hero nerds.
Return it to you when
He's,
I'm done. Okay?
I tried to do the same thing. You wouldn't let me have it.
Third.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank
We
you.
are adjourned.
I'm gonna I'll get.